Good evening. I call to order the regular meeting of the Lakewood City Council for March 14th, 2016. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Paul?
Here.
Wickman? Here. Vincent? Here. Roybal?
Here.
Harrison? Here. Johnson?
Here.
Shakti? Here. Abel? Here. Coop?
Here.
Franks? Here. Gutwein?
Here.
You have a quorum.
All right, thank you. This time I'd just like to welcome everybody for coming out tonight. We have a little bit of a crowd, so it's great to see some new faces. And if you do have a cell phone, if you wouldn't mind putting it on silence as we get ready to start the meeting. And at this moment, we will rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and stay standing for a moment of silent prayer. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. All right, will the clerk please read item 4?
Item 4, Proclamation Government Purchasing Month.
All right. I'll ask Terry Kinsfather to come on down and join me, please.
Hi.
You got some folks with you want to bring down?
Well, I have some folks that we're going to recognize.
Okay, good.
All right.
So I'll ask Council President Shakti to please read our proclamation.
Whereas the government procurement profession plays a significant role in the efficiency and effectiveness of both government and business, and whereas government procurement professionals are to be commended for their diligent pursuit of efficiency through their commitment to seek goods and services of the highest value in terms of quality and price to maximize the benefits to residents, and whereas purchasing organizations, including the City of Lakewood, provide an environment where all businesses are afforded an equal opportunity to compete for business with each level of government, and whereas in addition to the purchase of goods and services, Lakewood procurement professionals also perform functions such as executing and administering contracts, developing procurement strategies, and cultivating working relationships with suppliers and other city departments. And whereas such professionals throughout Colorado, including those at the municipal level, are committed to upholding the highest ideals of honor and integrity so as to merit the respect and confidence of the public, and whereas Lakewood's procurement professionals have adopted and practiced the public procurement values and guiding principles of accountability, ethics, impartiality, professionalism, service, and transparency established by the National Institute of Government Purchasing as fundamental tenets of the public procurement process. Now, therefore, on behalf of the City Council and the people of the City of Lakewood, I, Adam Paul, Mayor of the City of Lakewood, Colorado, by virtue of the authority vested in me, do hereby recognize Government Purchasing Month as March 2016.
All right. Well, we have Terry Kinsfather with us. She is the manager of purchasing for the City of Lakewood. Purchasing supervisor, and you do a wonderful job, and your staff does, and this is a really important service because it's not our money. We're dealing, with the citizens' money. So thank you for the job you do.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mayor Paul and Council, I would just like to take a moment to recognize the purchasing staff here at Lakewood. And they're right back here, if I could have them stand. We are missing one tonight, but everyone else is here. So, thank you. We actually have a total of 6 people in our purchasing division, and that is a tremendous amount of work that these six people do. And one of the things I would like to let you know, last year we received the Sterling Service Award for having a 100% certified agency for our purchasing division. And our finance director, Larry, said, well, where is it this year? Well, unfortunately, you have to have 3 years of a certified agency, and then you can get it again. So we're on year number 2. We're getting closer, but I just wanted to let you know. So thank you so much.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
clerk please read item 5 into the record?
Item 5, presentation, Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Communities 2015 Annual Report.
All right, thank you. We have a presentation this evening, and I'd like to call down the officers, Lori Simpkins, Jeff Yeager, and Samantha Larson. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Lori Simpkins, and I'm the 2016 Chair of the Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Community, lovingly known as the ACIC. So I've also served on the Chair of the Commission for 2015, and here with me are the Vice Chair, Sam Larson, and our Secretary, Jeff Yeager. It's our pleasure to review the progress we made last year and to let you know of our plans for the future. So I'd like to give you and the audience a little bit of a history about the ACIC. In 2007, the National League of Cities president created the Building an Inclusive Community program. Lakewood's then Mayor, Steve Burkholder, adopted the program and with the help of city councilors formed the ACIC, incorporating the city's 4 advisory commissions into the one. City Council established the Advisory Commission as a way to involve residents more directly in providing valuable public input regarding public and policy matters to City Council. And since that time, the ACIC has incorporated an ambassador program, opportunities for additional volunteerism, and is used as a sounding board for Lakewood projects. Members of the ACIC work hard to stay educated on Lakewood issues. The Commission has presented over 70 projects and assignments, which include the water quality, recommended ways to conserve water in city parks, included proposed use of gray water in new buildings, and recommended single-pass cooling systems. There was the Railcar 25 assignment, which explored the possibilities of relocating the Federal Center, or the trolley from the Federal Center to a location with the City of Lakewood, which led to the purchase of Railcar 25. There was the research for the smoke nuisance caused by residential outdoor fires. This addressed the issue of smoke nuisance from the use of residential outdoor fire pits, portable outdoor fireplaces, and recreational fireplaces. And in addition to all the work we do, we're proud that 4 members of the ACIC have gone on to serve as planning commissioners, and 4 members went on to be elected and currently serve as city council members: Karen Harrison, Pete Roybal, Shakti, and Dana Gutwine. At our November meeting, the commission elects new officers to serve for 1 year. So I'd like to recognize the other executive board members and ask them to stand. Tonight we have Cindy Girk from our Civic Awareness Committee, Lynn Nowak from the Neighborhoods Committee, and John Danahay, the chair of the Sustainability Committee. And then we also have several members that are serving as commissioners on the full commission. Thank you. So I'd like to now have Sam Larson report on the committees and their accomplishments from the last year.
Good evening. The commission is made up of 3 officers and 27 committee members, and they each serve on one of the 3 committees. The Civic Awareness Committee makes recommendations that promote civic responsibility and participation through education to create a more connected citizenry. A couple of proposals included the Civics 101 course promotion and participation in Day Without Hate on April 25th, 2014, which has led to an annual proclamation by the mayor. The Neighborhoods Committee makes recommendations that create relationships and encourage involvement within diverse populations to improve neighborhood pride and quality of life, such as ideas for Lakewood's 50th anniversary celebration and history of public space in Lakewood, posting their origins and their history. Then the Sustainability Committee makes recommendations that support and encourage a balanced vision of conservation and renewal. Some examples are community composting and education for residents and businesses on the hazards of plastic bag disposals. 2015 was a productive year for the ACIC and its members. A few of the assignments and recommendations that we worked on included recommendations for how to promote civility at city council meetings and other city functions, a proposal that suggested ways to reduce the number of abandoned grocery carts throughout the city, recommended changes to the number of signatures needed for initiative and referendum petitions. We also participated in several community events, and one of the highlights of the year was when Lori Simpkins and City Clerk Margie Greer were invited to speak at the International Hispanic Network Regional Seminar. This gave us a chance to tell Lakewood's story about creating an inclusive community. To continue our education over the past year, a few of our guest speakers included Detective Kelly Kane of Lakewood PD, who spoke on cybercrimes, Executive Director of 40 West Arts District Bill Marino, who spoke on the murals, art galleries, public art, theater, and new businesses along West Colfax. Heritage Center Curator Katie Lewis gave us a tour of the Heritage Center and spoke on the exhibits. And Mayor Bob Murphy spoke on his time on Planning Commission, City Council, and serving as mayor of the city of Lakewood. And now Secretary Jeff Yeager will speak on some of our future plans.
Sorry, I need to adjust it. Oh, hi. There are a variety of projects in the works. City Council assignments for ACIC to research and provide recommendations include identifying opportunities for the city to award neighborhoods and their leaders for the work toward improving Lakewood, identifying areas throughout the city to be developed as additional community gardens, possibly providing funding for the scholarships for the residents to allow them to attend Leadership Jeffco, and propose criteria for the selection process. The Commission grassroots initiatives include identifying methods to increase recycling in the Lakewood parks and open spaces, and encouraging increased diversification for Lakewood's boards and commissions. Members of the ACIC serve as ambassadors for the City of Lakewood, attending other agencies and organizations' public meetings and reporting back to City Council on issues that may pertain to the City of Lakewood. Currently, ambassadors are attending Jefferson County Parks and Open Spaces, advisory meetings, committee meetings, Jefferson County Board of Commissioners, Foothills Animal Shelter, Jeffco Public Schools Board of Education, and the Regional Air Quality Council meetings. I'll turn it back to Lori to wrap things up for us.
So I'd like to invite and encourage all interested residents to attend our meetings and become involved in our community. We currently have a few openings on the commission, and residents can visit the Lakewood website for more information or stop by the city clerk's office here at City Hall. And on behalf of the ACIC, we would like to thank the mayor and city council as well as the city staff members for their continued support, with a very special thank you to our advisor, Margie Greer, city clerk, and our coordinator, Ethan Westbrook. Thank you for all you do for us. Not quite, out of my garden. So we continue to serve with pleasure, and we hope that we're serving all of your needs and the needs of the citizens of Lakewood. So we look forward to working with you in 2016 and hope to answer any questions you would have at this time.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for everything that you do. Let me change my screen here. You know, I've seen this group really grow over the last few years. My 8 years on council, it's really changed a lot, and to see the amount of work you're doing and the quality of work that you're doing is just very impressive. So thank you for the time that you put in. You're just purely volunteers who care about your community, and that's what makes Lakewood a great community. So thank you, and I will imagine there's some other folks up here who would like to chat. Councilor Harrison.
Yes.
Still trying to get used to where everybody's.
I'm not down there, I'm over here. I wanted to tell you all thank you so much for your participation in the City of Lakewood, for the many nights that you sit out here listening and partaking in what goes on in the city, caring enough to be here and volunteering your time. It's really what creates leaders in Lakewood, and you are the leaders right now. So thank you so much for doing all that you do.
All right. Councilor Franks, she's over on the left. There she is.
I just wanted to add that this year I was on the selection committee that gets to interview folks for ACIC and other commissions and committees, and I just wanted to let the citizens know how impressed I was with the quality of the candidates, how prepared they came. It was really inspiring, so I just wanted to add that comment.
Councilor Gutwein.
Thank you. I also just wanted to thank all of you so much for the time that you put in and for giving to our community and helping shape our community, and how much I learned from my time serving with you. And it's things that I use every day up here, so I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you again. And how about we give them all a round of applause? Thank you very much to our staff support as well. You do a great job. Item 6, public comment. All right, so public comment. This is the point in the meeting where the public is invited to address the city council on items that did not appear on the agenda. So tonight, that's a distinction. If it's on the agenda, we'll have separate hearings for those later. So if it's not on the agenda, all comments should be directed to the city council. I will ask that all in attendance observe the decorum in the city council chambers and refrain from audible applause or audible support or discord with the speaker. There's a 3-minute limit per speaker. The indicator lights on the lectern will glow yellow after 2.5 minutes and red when your 3 minutes is up, and I'll gently try to let you know when that's up to wrap it up. So first on the list, we have Mr. James Mace. Come on down. Good evening, James.
Good evening. Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, James Mace, Ward 2. Mayor, City Council members, I have a question to ask every single one of you. Okay, I've noticed with Lakewood Police Department and Fire Department, these people come into our homes and help us when we call them. They come in and respond to every emergency that we have. But my question to you is, where's the community participation from the citizens, and where's the thank you from every single one of us when these people come in and risk their lives to bring us out of a burning building, or even more? I mean, perfect example, Mayor, Commander Pat Abner. Every time I need a question answered, I have been assigned by the city to go directly to her, but she does not get the recognition that I believe that every single agent, firefighter, and everybody deserves, because they, like I said, they pretty much risk their lives to save us. And do we show our appreciation for them? Not that I've seen in the last few years that I've been here. And I would really, with council's permission, I would really like to change that, because these people risk their lives every night to come help us with stuff that they don't know what we're carrying. They don't know if we've got pets. They come in blindsided. And I would like to, with council's permission, I would like to change that. I mean, I would like to start seeing some awards given from the citizens to the people that protect and serve, not only through the fire department, but through the police department as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mace. I couldn't agree more, and we're very lucky to have a top-notch police department and all of our first responders. And I will make sure that we get you an invite. We do a police awards every year, and it's a really nice ceremony. We'll make sure that we let you know when that is. I think you'd probably enjoy that. Next on the list, we have Mr. Tom Stalker. Okay. Yep, I will save you for that. Thank you, sir. Next on the list, we have Chris Kratt. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm a retired teacher and I live close to Lakewood High School. So first of all, my first minute, I want to thank you for being proactive and putting in the crosswalk at Garrison and 8th Avenue. It has been a true blessing to watch the kids cross there, get to the light rail. So first of all, I just wanted to thank you for doing that before we had any kind of disasters. Second, also pertains to Lakewood High School, which I dearly love the students and the staff there. They walk down 8th Avenue after dark. We live at 8th and Garrison, or 8th and Garland, and we have no street light there. So the only light they really have are 2 floodlights on the side of our house as they're going, you know, from sporting events down to the light rail. So I talked to Charlie about this once already. So if you could think about that, I don't know what your procedure is. If you could think about looking into a street light at Garland and 8th Avenue. And then my third thing for my last minute is Bear Creek Lake Park is a wonderful place, and there are many families who only kayak and paddleboard there, but it's really hard for them to transport these big boards and these kayaks that they have a lot of kids in their family. So I was just thinking maybe, I don't know what the rules are, it's a public park, if there would be a possibility of a storage unit that the public could use there. They can keep their boards down there just like Waikiki, you know, we could be the second Waikiki down there. But anyway, it's just a thought. So that's really all I have to say, unless anyone has any questions for me.
We'll have some comments after. But,
Okay.
I mean, you still do have another minute if you have a fourth.
I'm used to going to school board meetings, so I get to the point. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Abel, I'll come back to you after. So, okay. Thank you. Mr. Vaughn, come on down. Welcome.
My name is Newt Vaughn, and I live at Ward 5. About 2 or 3 weeks ago at the last public comment, somebody came down here and commented about bullying in schools. I'm just here to back him up. It's happening, and it's going to create a problem again. I worked for the school district for about 13 years as a bus driver, with the 3 classrooms behind us, and go down the road, and it's very hard to detect all of the stuff that goes on. Thanks to the cameras that they put on the buses, we can find things when there's been accusations, but nothing is happening. They're not doing anything to punish these people. We're just letting it go by and get away with it. The parents aren't backing it up, aren't backing up the school system. They just are ignorant to the whole thing. So I think it's time we start taking a serious look at what's going on before another disaster happens. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So that exhausts the folks who signed up for public comment roster. Anybody else like to speak on public comment? All right, with that, I will close public comment. Councilor Abel.
Ms. Kraft has a good point. You know, our schools are not open from 8 to 3 anymore. Kids are there all hours of the day and night, and it's a pretty dark stretch along 8th Street there, but even across the street on the east side of Garrison, there are some dark spots that are frequented by our kids, and it's right next to the park. I think we would do well to put some light on the subject.
Well said, sir. Ms. Hodson will have somebody follow up. All right. Thank you very much. Anything else from council? All right.
Sir, Mayor, may I make one comment in response to James Mace's comments? Just you may notice on your future agenda items on your draft agenda, on May 9th, we will have a proclamation honoring the first responders in our city. So that's law enforcement, that's our fire service gentlemen, women and gentlemen, et cetera. So May 9th is a day that we will pay special respect for those first responders in our city.
Very nice. Thank you. Councilor Gutwein.
Thank you. I also just wanted to respond about the bullying because I do believe this is a really important issue. And after our last meeting, I met with Chief Paletta to talk about what kind of programs we offer in our schools and learn about the ones that are effective. So I think that this is something we can continue to partner on to keep our community safe.
All right, thank you. The next part of our meeting is the consent agenda. The use of the consent agenda has been made to expedite council action. It contains both resolutions and first reading ordinances, and tonight it'll be resolutions only. Any council member may request an item on the consent agenda be removed for separate discussion and action under general business. Will the clerk read the items on the consent agenda into the record?
The consent agenda consists of items 7 through 11 inclusive. Item 7, Resolution 2016-9, authorizing the creation of an ad hoc committee to develop and recommend a code of conduct for the Lakewood City Council and appointing members thereto. Item 8, Resolution 2016-10, updating the City of Lakewood 3-mile plan for annexations. Item 9, Resolution 2016-11, approving a legal services agreement with the firm of Mechow, Cox and McCaskill LLP. Item 10, approving the minutes of the regular City Council meetings of February 8th and February 22nd, both 2016. And item 11, accepting the minutes of the Advisory Commission for an Inclusive Communities Full Commission meeting of January 20th, 2016, and the Lakewood Board of Adjustment meeting of October 7th, 2015.
All right, thank you. I would like to pull item 9, Resolution 2016-11, and place it under general business, please. So with that said, I would like to, Councilor Abel.
I have a comment on item 8. Do you want to break it out, or shall I just?
I was going to open the public hearing first and then go to council member comments after the public hearing.
Mayor, pardon me, there's also a presentation for item 8.
Thank you.
Is that okay? All right. So at this time, I will open the public hearing on items 7, 8, 10, and 11. Nobody signed up. And Mr. Stalker, I think you meant you on item 9, right? 9. Yeah. Okay. So with that, there's no comment. I'll close public comment, and we'll have a presentation on item number 8. Mr. Stephen Wilson, welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. My name is Stephen Wilson. I'm a planner with the City of Lakewood. I'm here this evening to give a brief presentation on the 3-mile plan. So the request is to approve the 2015 3-mile plan. And yes, that is the 2015 3-mile plan. We ran out of time at the end of last year. So we're here to ask for approval of the 2015 plan, and then we'll be back later this year with the 2016 plan. The 3-mile plan is required by Colorado revised state statutes and is required to be updated annually. It is a plan that generally describes the 3-mile area that can be annexed into the City of Lakewood. The 3-mile plan is pertinent to all unincorporated land within this 3-mile area. No annexation may take place that would have the effect of extending a municipal boundary for more than 3 miles in any direction in 1 year. Annexable land includes unincorporated land in Jefferson County and land that shares a border with the city and that has a border that's not less than 1/6 of its perimeter. Land that exists in other municipalities is not subject to annexation unless it is disconnected from that municipality. A 3-mile plan is required by state statute, regardless of whether a municipality has plans to annex or not. For some municipalities who are actively trying to grow their city boundary, a 3-mile plan is an essential tool for guiding city expansion. Because the city of Lakewood is an established city, the city's 3-mile plan references existing plans. And I would like to note there are no applications for annexation at this time. So this is the map that's in the 3-mile plan. The area in blue is in the city of Lakewood. The tan color to the north and to the east are existing municipalities. And then the salmon-colored area is portions of unincorporated Jefferson County. You'll also notice some hatched areas within the blue in the city of Lakewood, and those are enclaves, but those are still in Jefferson County. No new areas were annexed into the city into 2015. And then the last property to be annexed into the city was the Taylor property, which is south of the former Green Gables Country Club. And that annexation occurred at the request of the owner in 2013. The 2015 plan shows changes from the 2014 plan, and it includes updates from Jefferson County's comprehensive plan and their adopted plans, including the Conifer 285 Corridor Area Plan. Then in the city of Lakewood, we adopted a new comprehensive plan. The city adopted a new sustainability plan, and the city adopted new citywide plans, implementations, and implementation strategies. Although some of these specific plans may not relate directly to annexation decisions, I've included them in the 3-mile plan for reference. This slide is a map showing a graphic representation of some of the plans referenced in the document. To the west, the plans are mostly addenda to the Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan, but for all annexations, we will review the Lakewood Comprehensive Plan. So staff's recommendation is to approve the 2015 3-mile plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. And I'm going to go back real quick on something and just reopen a public hearing on this, on item number 8, to see if there was any questions or any comment now that there was a presentation on item 8. All right. I will reclose public comment period on resolution 2016-10, and I will go to Councilor Abel. Question.
Comment first. That was an amazing condensation of a long document, and thank you very much. When will we be entertaining the 2016 plan, and how long will the 2015 3-mile plan be in effect, since there's no longer a 2015 with us?
Well, the 2015 plan will be in effect until we adopt the 2016 plan. And then typically we bring those to the Planning Commission and City Council towards the end of the year.
Thank you.
Councilor Wickman.
A question regarding the, now I'm drawing a mental blank here. Green Gables, there you go, thank you. The Green Gables enclave, is that going to be annexable in 3 years or not?
The Green Gables became an enclave in September of 2013, and state statute requires a 3-year period before it becomes an annexable enclave. So in September of 2016, that would become an annexable enclave.
Any other questions from council? Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. Whoops. Thank you. I'm not sure if this is the appropriate time, but could you address the property that is west of C470, that apparently there's some interest in automobile dealerships? Is that would that be appropriate with this plan?
Well, if the property owner chose to annex, we would look at the 3-mile plan for any annexation, that one or any other plan. So that property is in the county now. If we get an application for annexation, we would look at this plan.
Gotcha.
All right. Anybody else? With that said, I will entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda minus item 9.
Mayor Paul, I move for approval of the council minutes, for acceptance of the minutes of boards and commissions, and for adoption of resolutions, minus item number 9, which is Resolution 2016-11, all of which are included in the consent agenda items introduced into the record by the clerk.
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Any other comments? Please cast your votes. There you go. And it passes. 11 ayes, 0 nays. So, the next item is a rezoning hearing. There's a written sheet titled Rezoning Hearing Procedures at City Council Meetings on green paper available on the table by the entrance to the City Council chambers. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with the steps we follow in conducting the hearing, you are welcome to get a copy of this information at any time. All persons present should be advised that the City Council has received and reviewed the written findings and recommendations of the Planning Commission in this manner. Let's see. We have also received a notice that the entire record is available for review by members of council. The City Council must consider only the record before the Planning Commission. The written findings and recommendations of the Planning Commission, any previously filed written objections to those findings and recommendations, and the comments relating to them made during the hearing. It is not necessary, therefore, for the applicant, any proponent, or any protestant to repeat any presentation, argument, or information given to the Planning Commission. Any person who wishes to speak will be limited to the same 3-minute rule when you come up here, and we'll ask you for your name and address. Will the city clerk please introduce item 12 into the record?
Item 12, Ordinance O 2016-1, to rezone land located at 7590, 7570, and 7400 West Quincy Avenue, City of Lakewood, County of Jefferson, State of Colorado.
Okay. And before I open the public hearing on this item, there's 2 council comments that I'll go to real quick. Councilor Gutwein.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. During my campaign, I went door to door in this neighborhood and asked residents about the issues that were facing them in their neighborhood. More than one of the neighbors suggested that I attend their neighborhood HOA meeting, which I did. And during that meeting, the board discussed this rezoning case. As I recall, the members of the board supported this application. I didn't hear anyone speak out in opposition to this rezoning application. And leading up to this and after I was elected, I learned that this is quasi-judicial. But at the time, I was a candidate and not yet elected, and did not know that this would be facing me as a council person. So I did not, and I was not aware that they would be discussing this case at that meeting. In any event, the comments that I heard in support of this project will not affect my objectivity, and I am confident that I can participate in this discussion and the vote on this application without any bias. Thank you.
All right. Councilor Abel?
I, too, had knowledge of this case before I was elected a year and a half ago as it was going to the Planning Commission. And after the Planning Commission, I had a brief discussion with one of the planning commissioners about one of the elements involved a deed restriction. I believe I can make it. I know I can make a decision based on what is presented to us tonight. There was nothing in that previous knowledge that brought me to a conclusion. So I believe I can maintain my objectivity in this vote.
Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate that. And since this is a little bit new to some of the folks up here, this is our first rezone as a new body. I'm going to turn it over to our city attorney, Tim Cox, to give us a quick summary of how this process works, and also for you in the audience or folks tuned in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is something that we've done at previous rezoning hearings, but it has been a while. There tends to be some gaps between them, and we want to make sure everybody's comfortable with the rules of the game, as it were. The staff report that you've received from the planners addresses much of the same content, so I'll be saying a couple of things that you're already familiar with from reading that staff report, but we're bringing it to you for emphasis and to add a couple of other points as well. First and foremost are the criteria to be applied by the council. There's sometimes a confusion about what you can and cannot consider, but as laid out in the staff report, your role here as you listen to the evidence and consider what you've read is to decide whether the rezoning may be approved, and no rezoning may be approved unless the council determines that the proposal promotes the health, safety, or welfare of the inhabitants of the city, promotes the purposes of the zoning ordinance, is compatible with surrounding uses, enhances significant natural characteristics of the site, complies with the performance-based review process, and meets one of the following, is consistent with the goals of the comprehensive plan, and you'll hear more about the comprehensive plan in this context in a few minutes, or that there's been a material change in the character of the neighborhood, or that the property was previously zoned in error. I don't think we'll hear anything on those final 2 points. So the last criteria to consider is the consistency with the goals of the comprehensive plan. Two things that you should avoid taking into account because they are not part of the criteria to consider it would be the identity or reputation of the applicant. Rezoning cases are to determine the compatibility of a proposed use with its surrounding area and those other criteria that we read. An applicant can bring a rezoning application in and then sell the project the next day. So it's not about who's going to develop a property, it's what is the proposed development and is it consistent with the surrounding area. The other item that has come up in at least one previous hearing that I, again, don't think will be a factor tonight is that whether there's an ownership or a rental component to the proposal, and this is normally in a residential context, but that's not a factor to be considered as well. So when you've completed your consideration of the evidence and gone through those criteria in your own minds, your options as a board, as a group, after the public hearing, are to continue the matter when there's a need for further proceedings before the Planning Commission, revise the Planning Commission's findings of fact, but only if that revision is supported by evidence in the record, and then proceed to vote on the rezoning ordinance if you have revised the findings of fact, to adopt the Planning Commission's findings of fact and proceed to vote on the rezoning ordinance, or to table the decision to a date certain. So those are the options available to you. This case has been pending for quite some time, and I'm not aware of any request to prolong the proceedings. So, but those are the options available to the council at the conclusion of the public hearing. I hope that's helpful and ready to answer any questions you may have about that.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. Any questions before we go forward from council for Mr. Cox? All right, we will keep going. So I will now open the public hearing on this item. Is the applicant or legal representative present? Good evening. Welcome.
Looks like Stephen is setting up the presentation. So good evening. My name is Vince Harris. I'm with Baseline Corporation. We're a planning and engineering and survey firm. The application before you tonight is a rezoning application, and I am here to have been working with Charlie Klimp and his son CJ, who are over here in the second row. They're the owners of the corner property. Ken Gum is here as well. He is with RE/MAX, and he is the realtor for Charlie Klimp. Again, I'm Vince Harris, and I also have Ethan Wattell here with Baseline. He's been one of the planners that has been assisting us putting the application together. So this is an application for rezoning. It's from the R112 zone district to the MNS zone district. There's 3 properties included in this application. It includes the corner property owned by Charlie Klimp, the second property owned by Jack Liang and Wendy Liu, and then the third property owned by Chris Sherwood. I'd like to go through a little bit of history here with this application because it's a little bit lengthy, but I'd like to go through this. This is a property that was platted in 1955, the community. There's a number of single-family homes that are in this community. 5 of those lots were created, and they face Quincy Avenue. Again, that was in 1955. Wadsworth and Quincy were both dirt country roads at that point in time. Lakewood incorporated in 1969. And obviously, since 1969, here in the city of Lakewood, as well as city and county of Denver and unincorporated Jefferson County, significant development has occurred along the Wadsworth corridor since 1955. This stretch of Wadsworth, as indicated, was a dirt road and a state highway, and today it now carries 51,000 plus vehicles per day. Mr. Klimp has owned and lived on this corner for over 30 years. Things have changed immensely, and Mr. Klimp began this vision to rezone this property approximately 25 years ago. With that, I'd like to deviate a little bit on the history and give you a little bit more information about what has happened in the last 25 years. 25 years ago, I was working here at the City of Lakewood in the planning department, and that's when I met Charlie Klimp. Charlie and his wife in 1990, they approached Lakewood and looked at the opportunity to try and rezone the property because they had numerous contacts by which people wanted to buy their property. Obviously, it would need to be rezoned and accommodate for gas sales and other types of uses at that time. Ultimately, the staff position that we had at that time was that we couldn't support that. It was just too soon. So what transpired over the next few years was that the Long-Range Planning Division took on its first neighborhood community plan, and this was it. It was for the Lockmore neighborhood. During that time, the Long-Range Planning Division sponsored some design charrettes, and numerous people in the neighborhood community in Lockmore participated in that, including the neighbors who lived not fronting Quincy but back in the neighborhood, and then those property owners that owned property that fronted Quincy. A couple of those people are here tonight. There might be some more, but Steve and Sandy Payne, who are with the Lockmore Property Owner Association, were there at that time, and they're still there, and they've been many of our main contacts with the neighborhood. So what happened? That neighborhood plan was put together. That was in the early 1990s, and then eventually additional development happened in the city and county of Denver, which is across the street, which is where the Walmart is and all the retail pads out in front of Walmart. That's in the city and county of Denver, and those properties developed on the southwest corner of Quincy and Wadsworth. So that brings us, that kind of fast forwards this to today and this rezoning application. Charlie searched me down a few years ago and asked if I would take on him assisting, looking at going through this rezoning process. We're happy to be here tonight and present this case to you. So with that, we suggest it's time to see this corner transform to today's reality and outlook. Like other similar corners along the Wadsworth corridor have done in time, it is not particularly pleasing to reside or face a significant intersection in the Wadsworth corridor. A new owner could transform this property into an asset for the neighborhood and create a place with much more vitality in the area for the community. So what I'd like to do now is just go through a little bit more of the presentation and just orient you a little bit more to the site. North is kind of down to the lower left. We're kind of looking to the southeast corner of the intersection. Here's Quincy here on the diagonal this way, and then Wadsworth Boulevard is here. As you can see, and I think everybody probably knows, this intersection is a quite large intersection in the city. Again, down here to the southwest is, this is the front side, but some of the pad sites out in front of the Walmart, which is directly across the street. So the three properties, this is the Klimp property here, second property is the Liang property, and the third property is the Sherwood property. So the subject properties to the rezone application are all included in this yellow hatched area. Kind of panning back out now, obviously in the city of Lakewood boundaries are shown in blue. City and County of Denver boundaries are shown in the mustard color. Obviously Wadsworth is in this location here. That's where it bends around and heads down south towards Southwest Plaza. And then Quincy Avenue is in an east-west direction right here. The three properties included in this case tonight are located here in the red. And when you add up the size of those parcels, it's about just about short of 2.5 acres. So again, as you can see now, without the colors here, you can see the development that has occurred down here on the south side of Quincy, and obviously most of it to the west side of Wadsworth Boulevard is here, and then other commercial properties down to the south. Obviously Quincy is here. The Parade of Homes was a number of years ago, was held over here in the Pinehurst area, and there were additional improvements added to Quincy Avenue at that point in time when the Parade of Homes was conducted over there. And again, this is the Lockmore neighborhood here at the southeast corner here, and it shows obviously the homes that aren't fronting onto Quincy. There are two, let me go back a couple slides. There are two more properties, only one of them really shows up. Yeah, they both do. There's a property right here located directly east of the Sherwood property, and then another home here, which is kind of a pie-shaped property that also fronts onto Quincy. So there are actually 5 properties that front onto Quincy today. Those 2 properties are not part of this application. And they show up a little bit better here now. So again, these are lots 1, 2, and 3, as well as 4 and 5, but lots 1, 2, and 3 are included in this application. This is the existing Lakewood zoning map. Again, the site is highlighted here in black. Obviously, all the colored areas are in the city of Lakewood. Single-family neighborhood up here on the northwest corner, which is the Marston Slopes neighborhood. The northeast corner here is part of the Academy Park area. Obviously, and then the southeast corner here is R112 zoning and is the single-family neighborhood. City and County of Denver is over here. So let's talk about uses here. Currently on the property is zoned R112, and I've listed the uses that are permitted here in the R112 zone district. Obviously, single-family homes are group homes for 1 to 8 persons, parks, schools, utility facilities, and wireless communication facilities. So those are the existing uses that are permitted today. With this proposed rezoning to the MNS zone district, and the MNS, I know Stephen will go through this, but stands for Mixed Use Neighborhood Suburban Context. The uses allowed in the MNS zone district are the same as the R112 zone district, so the same uses that are listed over here are permitted. A duplex, attached dwellings, office, daycare uses, adult and child, retail, restaurant, bars, clubs, entertainment facilities, galleries, religious institutions, personal service, and private athletic facilities or fitnesses. So as been alluded to, we've conducted a number of meetings over the past few years and have had numerous conversations with the Lockmore POA and the board through the neighborhood meeting and through the follow-up process after that, as late as last month on February 17th. We've listened to the neighborhood, we've heard their concerns, we've gone through the rezoning application, we've updated it, and we've tried to respond as best as we can with the issues that have been brought up. And we appreciate the neighborhood's input, and obviously value that, and we look forward to continue to working with them. We believe we responded appropriately to their concerns that have been brought up and expressed by the neighborhood, and has been further discussed and already been brought up, discussions about deed restrictions. So what we've talked about doing here is doing some private deed restrictions, and I'm going to go through the list of kind of the topics that have been of concern and discussion in dealing with the Lockmore neighborhood. Desire for no adult businesses, bars, clubs, service organizations, etc., marijuana businesses, microbrew restaurants that are larger than, and I know the neighborhood is, we'll talk about that because we had talked about 1,500 square feet, and recently, and even since the meeting we had on February 17th, there was concern about 1,500 square feet, and we are proposing to limit that to 2,000 square feet in size. So that's probably about the only difference that we may have had since our discussion on the February 17th. But anyway, limit microbrew restaurants, if there ever was one, to nothing greater than 2,000 square feet. Motor vehicle service and fuel stations. So the gas station idea that was originally thought of 25 years ago continues to be a concern, and this deed restriction would limit the opportunity for any type of a gas sales there. Freestanding parking, just selling the property and building a parking lot. So that was a concern. Pawnbrokers, restaurants in greater size than 2,000 square feet and or the 1,500 that we had previously discussed. Any restaurants requiring a grease trap, so that's a lot of cooking, that was a concern. And then some of the other uses that kind of show up on an ancillary basis, it's temporary uses, short-term, and then transportation facilities, so like a park and ride. Duplexes was a concern, a major utility facility, and then the wireless communication opportunities that are around the cities. So with that, you kind of take that last list we looked at like here, and with those deed restrictions that would be included, this is kind of what gets eliminated. And so everything that's in red are subject to the sort of the deed restrictions that I guess you could say. And so there would be elimination of the utility facilities and wireless communication facilities. So you wouldn't see a tall tower there, or even for that matter, panels added onto any building. The opportunity for a duplex, no fuel, no pawn shop, no marijuana, or no adult uses. The limitation on microbrew and restaurant to nothing larger than 2,000 square feet, and no grease trap. And then the no standalone parking, and then no transportation facility. So that's what we have been working with, and are prepared to work on that with the deed restrictions. So now let's go back to the property again. And through the process that we've been working with the planning department and the public works department in getting this application before you, there are a number of things that we have been working on with both departments. And one of the items was we put together a conceptual site plan, and it's one of probably 50 different ways you could probably develop the property in the future. There is no intended user at this point in time. There certainly are there are interested parties that have been interested in wanting to purchase this property in years past, but none of them go very far because the property is not zoned to accommodate anything other than a single-family home. So here's a layout that we put together. It shows the building, a potential building here. It's the likelihood of the first two homes going away is, in my opinion, is pretty likely, and that maybe a single building could get built over here with parking out in front and maybe a little bit to the side. And then what we refer to as the Sherwood property over here, that home could be retained and reused and reconstructed or updated with maybe it stays and maybe another office use could go into that property there with a parking lot here. Combined access, that was one of the issues we had to work out with the Public Works Department, is a combined access here. An access point has to be at least 300 feet according to the CDOT standards from the Wadsworth Boulevard intersection. So that brings the potential location for an access drive somewhere in this area right in here to the kind of the west side of this second lot. So that's one possible development scenario. So kind of going back to the Lockwood neighborhood concerns, we've worked on eliminating the undesirable uses. There were discussions about fencing along the south property line, that being the south property line of these properties. With the new Lakewood zoning standards that were adopted a couple of years ago with the new zoning ordinance, there are already built-in buffer and landscape and fencing requirements. And I'm sure Stephen can talk to you a little bit more about that. Those requirements are already built into the code, and there's not anything that we can do to add height to something that's already not permitted. So, so that's just a additional item that you probably might come up with discussion. Same thing about landscaping along the south property line. There is a kind of an increase in height opportunity with the MNS zone district, as long as the property is at least, or I say the building is at least, I believe it's 75 feet away from a residential property. In the MNS zone district, the building is allowed to go up to 45 feet in height. We are agreeing with the neighborhood's concerns, and we would cap any building on this property to a height of 35 feet, which is the standard residential building height. So we've included that as well. And this area here, actually, this is just a diagram that shows the area in blue here, according to the MNS zone district. This is where a building could be 45 feet in height based on the 75-foot separation from the residential zoning here to the south and to the east. And so this shows the 35-foot height limit is allowed in this location right here on the south and east sides of the property. So going to the standards, even that Mr. Cox alluded to, the R112 zoning probably is not appropriate, at least at this intersection of the two arterial streets. It's an old subdivision that was approved a number of years ago. Meaning a number of years ago, and that the viability of actually residing at the intersections is probably not the best for residential use. We believe that the proposed zoning will enhance this property and the surrounding area. It would accommodate small-scale neighborhood-type uses that will serve this immediate neighborhood. And the character of Quincy and the homes that have been fronted on it have changed significantly since 1955. So with that, we appreciate the time that the neighborhood has put in and the staff has in putting into this application and understanding it. We're ready to move forward and respectfully request that you, the City Council, review the staff report, concur with the Planning Commission and staff findings on their recommendations, and now approve the rezoning case for these properties. And with that, what I would like to do is just kind of give you a glimpse of other intersections along not just Wadsworth, but I have two examples. The most recent example that I think probably everyone will remember is the corner of Wadsworth in Florida that was transformed from, actually it was a vacant field to accommodate the Super Credit Union on the northwest corner of Quincy in Florida, and essentially was somewhat embedded into the neighborhood. Another example, which we have used with Lockmore since even before this property was rezoned and built on, was the Kipling and Kentucky property, which is an office building at the corner of, obviously, Kipling and Kentucky. The other item is this property here is a residential home that was rezoned back in the late 90s, and that is actually a dentist office, which is at the corner of Wadsworth and Bales, just right across from the Jewel Square Shopping Center, just north of Jewel Avenue. And I'm just going to leave this picture up here, and unless Stephen wants to sit on another photo during the discussion, but again, this is the property, and we'll be glad to answer questions either now or at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We'll probably have some questions a little bit later, so.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, and Mr. Wilson, welcome back.
Mayor and City Council, again, my name is Stephen Wilson, and I'm here to present the staff report for the rezoning request at Quincy and Wadsworth. It's RZ 13001. The applicant is proposing to rezone the properties from large lot residential to mixed-use neighborhood suburban. The process is described in the zoning ordinance, and it includes a pre-planning application, neighborhood meeting, formal application, and planning commission hearing. All of these steps have been completed. Tonight we're here for the final decision by the City Council, and if approved, the applicant can apply for a site plan, plat, and building permits, again, if the the rezoning is approved. Mr. Harris did a nice job of giving an orientation, so I will be brief. As he mentioned, the 3 properties are at the corner of Wadsworth and West Quincy Ave on the southeast corner. The zoning for the properties is R112, large lot, one family residential. To the east and to the south is the same zoning. Across Quincy Avenue is mixed-use employment suburban zoning to the north. That's a mixed-use zone district. And then to the west is in the city of Denver, and that's a commercial zoning. This first property at 7590 West Quincy Avenue is owned by Mr. Klim. This next property, which is the property in the middle, is 7570, and this is owned by Jack Liang and Wendy Liu. And then the third property, which is the easternmost property, is 7400 West Quincy Ave, and that's owned by Christine Sherwood. In terms of adjacent uses, it's similar to the zoning, so there's single-family residential to the east and to the south. There's commercial to the west, and then to the north is the Whole Health Center and dentist's office, and then to the north and east is an undeveloped piece of property. Then there has been interest in doing a senior community on that property. Throughout the process, there have been 4 primary review considerations. Due to the location of the properties along 2 arterial roadways, allowing a commercial use makes sense, and the single-family homes appear to have outlived their usefulness. Consistency with the comprehensive plan is a critical piece. As a point of clarification, this rezoning must be reviewed against the previous comprehensive plan or the comprehensive in place at the time when the application was submitted. In the memorandum that I had sent you to City Council, I included a review against the current comprehensive plan, and this was for informational purposes only. So again, this is to be reviewed against the previous comprehensive plan. A third primary consideration was project feasibility. Based on the preliminary engineering, a solution for drainage and access were developed. On the slide, you can see the big fatter arrow that indicates the access location, and then the narrow arrow indicates access between lots, and then blue indicates drainage. As a result, the applicant and his consultants have worked with the applicant group to obtain letters of agreement for drainage and access across the different properties, and this is if the properties are developed. The time to obtain these agreements is the primary reason there were approximately 18 months between the Planning Commission and today's City Council hearing. The fourth primary consideration were the allowable uses and zoning standards. Based on the neighborhood meeting and the subsequent conversations, the allowable uses are a concern to neighbors, and Mr. Harris has addressed the uses in his presentation. In this slide, it shows a comparison between the R112 and the MNS zoning. Again, that stands for Mixed Use Neighborhood Suburban. And what I wanted to point out is if the rezoning is approved, all of the MN uses will be allowed. So it's all the uses that are on the right-hand side of that slide. The mixed-use neighborhood zone district was intentionally created for this type of a situation. And the zone district is intended to accommodate a mix of lower intensity, neighborhood scale, commercial uses, and a range of residential uses, generally along busy streets and adjacent to transit. Typical non-residential uses include those that provide goods and services to the residents of the surrounding neighborhoods. Within the mixed-use neighborhood suburban zone district, there are specific development standards in support of the zone district's intent to provide a transition to non-residential uses. The first that Mr. Harris mentioned is a 75-foot height transition zone, or as represented by the slide above, when adjacent to single-family residential, the height will be limited to that residential height, in this case of 35 feet. And that will be measured 75 feet from the property line, and I'll show another slide that helps explain that. The second standard in the MNS zoning is when a commercial or mixed-use project is adjacent to a single-family residential, a buffer is required. In the zoning ordinance, there are 4 buffer requirements, so one of these 4 buffers would have to be used on the properties adjacent to single-family residential. And then the last important MNS zoning standard is compatibility for bulk plane and commercial area limitations. So the bulk plane compatibility has to do with where the building is on the site relative to those property lines. So a bulk plane would not allow a big 35-foot tall building pushed right up against the property or right up against the setback. It would have to be pushed further back on site. Additionally, the maximum non-residential building footprint in the MNS zone district is 15,000 square feet. Based on the zoning standards, the applicant has created a conceptual site plan. And I'd like to note that the conceptual site plan is not binding. An applicant may submit a formal site plan application with a different layout, but provided it meets all the standards. So this plan before us is good at demonstrating some of the standards. So the first I'd like to point out is the height transition zone. So the area shaded in sort of a orange, well, let's see, what does it look like tonight? Orangey beige color. That's 75 feet from the property line. And for that 75-foot area, the buildings would be limited to 35 feet in height. The next is a landscape buffer. So on the south and east sides, any development that comes in would have to have a landscape buffer that meets one of those 4 buffer criteria. Bulk plane compatibility. The buildings that are located on this conceptual plan are pushed further away from the property line and would work with the bulk plane compatibility standard. The maximum non-residential footprint, none of these buildings are bigger than 15,000 square feet. And then I also would like to point out the access location, that's a orange-yellow circle, that is 300 feet from South Wadsworth Boulevard, and that does meet the spacing requirements. So as a project overview, this proposed rezoning, if approved, will enable an opportunity for a commercial development that will enhance sidewalks around the perimeter and landscaping improvements, respect the residential heights in the transition zone, provide detention facilities, buffer the residential uses to the east and south, allow small-scale commercial at the intersection of 2 arterials, and minimize curb cuts onto Quincy Avenue. In conjunction with the application, a preliminary engineering and a traffic study were provided. The preliminary engineering meets the requirements of the City of Lakewood, and it meets the requirements for the City and County of Denver, because Wadsworth Boulevard is in the City and County of Denver, as well as Colorado Department of Transportation standards. As part of the process, referrals and public notification are required. Referrals were sent to outside agencies and no objections were received. Public notification requirements were satisfied. A mailed notification was sent prior to the neighborhood meeting, prior to the Planning Commission meeting, and then prior to tonight's meeting. Notification was published in Your Hub, and the property was posted with the appropriate signs. No objections were received after the most recent, or the notification. A neighborhood meeting was held. The neighborhood meeting was held on September of 2012 with approximately 30 attendees. There's been continual communication between the applicant and the neighborhood group since. At that neighborhood meeting, there were questions and concerns about proposed uses, traffic generation, site and landscaping layout, and architecture and height. And as we've gone through, the zoning ordinance addresses a number of those. So rezoning proposals must be evaluated against the criteria in the Lakewood zoning ordinance. So there are 3 criteria in the Lakewood zoning ordinance, and they're summarized above. The first is that the proposed rezoning promotes the purpose and intent of the Lakewood zoning ordinance. The second is that the proposed rezoning is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. And then the third is that it meets one of the following. And what we'll show later in the presentation is that the proposed rezoning meets the first two, and then the third is not applicable. So the first is that it promotes the purpose of the comprehensive plan. And then the second, or B, is that there's a change in character of the neighborhood. Okay. So the proposed rezoning supports the purpose and intent of the Lakewood zoning ordinance for the following reasons. Public health, safety, and welfare of the citizens of Lakewood will be improved because it will provide an opportunity to utilize a site adjacent to 2 arterial roadways. The rezoning process supports the intent of the zoning ordinance by promoting orderly development through a public process. The rezoning will provide an opportunity to enhance the appearance of the city, and the rezoning will provide an opportunity to ensure the economic vitality of the city. The next is neighborhood compatibility. The proposed rezoning is compatible with the existing surrounding land uses because of the following reasons. The proposed rezoning is an extension of the mixed-use zone district to the north. The mixed-use neighborhood suburban zone district will allow uses that are similar to the allowable uses to the north and west. The mixed-use neighborhood suburban zone district is intended to create a buffer between higher intensity uses and residential neighborhoods. The mixed-use neighborhood suburban zone district limits the amount of commercial and office building square footages or footprints and will help provide a buffer to the adjacent residential neighborhood. And the rezoning standards, as mentioned earlier, will limit the height of buildings when adjacent to single-family residential. Then third, the proposed rezoning promotes the implementation of the comprehensive plan because it will promote compact land use patterns and the development of mixed-use centers. It will encourage high-quality infill and redevelopment projects, and it will concentrate activities that serve the immediate neighborhood. Additionally, and just one of these criteria would need to be satisfied, but staff believes that both of these are satisfied, there has been a material change in the neighborhood character. As Mr. Harris mentioned, the Lockmore subdivision plat was recorded in 1955, and at that time, Quincy and Wadsworth were not paved and not as wide as they are today. Single-family residential along arterial streets is possibly less desirable, and commercial development has occurred to the west and will likely occur to the north. Based on the information provided, Charles Klimp, representing the property owners group, is proposing to rezone from large lot residential to mixed-use neighborhood suburban. And the notification requirements have been satisfied, and the request was reviewed by the appropriate referral agencies, and the proposed rezoning promotes the purpose and intent of the Lakewood zoning ordinance, and the proposed rezoning is compatible with the existing surrounding land uses, and the proposed rezoning promotes implementation of the comprehensive plan, and there was a material change in the character of the neighborhood. Therefore, staff recommends that City Council adopt the findings and fact of order A through H as presented in the staff report, and recommends that the City Council approve rezoning case RZ 13001. Thank you.
Mr. Wilson, thank you. You fit a lot of information into the bulk plane of that. Appreciate that. Well done. All right. So I will now open up public comment on this rezone. We have 2 folks that have signed up. If you haven't signed up, you'll be given that chance afterwards as well. Again, 3-minute time limit. And first on the list, is it Bunny Rankin? Good evening. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Bunny Rankin. I was born on Easter, so it is what it is.
Oh, that's cool.
I do live in Lockwood, in Lockmore.
Could you talk into the mic, please? Yep.
I live at 7400 West Radcliffe Avenue, and I no doubtably realize that there will be responsible rezoning issues here. I think that they've handled it very well. I had a concern at the first neighborhood meeting, It's never been addressed, so I'm going to address it now. I don't have a slide. I don't know if I could use one of Mr. Harris's slide that shows the south side of Quincy. We have aerial utility lines. They're very ugly. On this specific corner, there are several transformers. So my concern is, and I expressed this at the first neighborhood meeting, you really can't see it. If a development was to happen, and I know there is nothing scheduled to happen, I would love to see that because Lakewood doesn't have the money, someone bury those power lines, not only in front of this site, but complete the burial all the way to the entrance of Lockmore. It's not that much further. I don't know the number of feet. I just think this is an opportunity to get something done because there is no one else that has the money to do this. It would be an improvement, and as legal stated, let me put my glasses back on, a rezone should enhance the characteristics of the site. So based on your legal quote that we heard here tonight, I just ask that this somehow be incorporated into this plan to any future development. Mixed use, of course, is on the north side of Quincy, and that is completely buried. There are no aerial power lines there. I think it would enhance our neighborhood. It would enable us to do something a little more beautiful with our entrance. And that's pretty much all I have to say. I would like to see that incorporated into the plan. However that can be done, I'm not sure legally. But thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Thanks for coming down. All right. Next up, we have Mr. Payne. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, City Council people. Another Ward 5 resident of Lockmore. Been here before for various things through the years, and usually what we always found was we were fighting an inappropriate proposal for these lots. Sometimes just one at a time, or maybe it tried to include them all, but it was a big tall Walgreens or something like that. And we welcomed the opportunity to try to be part of crafting this proposal and getting ahead of maybe the next development proposal for this lot. And I want to thank personally Charlie Klimp, his son CJ. Ken Gumm's been real good in this process. Of course, we have Vince and Ethan from Baseline. It's been a good process. It's taken a long time. They've listened to our concerns. We believe that due to the size of the property and the limitations we've put on it, we can end up with some sort of development, whether it's all at once or in pieces, that addresses our concerns, doesn't bring too much uninvited activity into the neighborhood. Hours of business are hopefully okay, stuff like that. So we really do feel, and I'm no longer a member of the board, I'm just a citizen, but we think that it would be a good thing.
All right.
And that's all I have.
Thank you very much. All right. Anybody else like to comment on this? Ms. Wanger?
Good evening. It appears that there has been a neighborhood meeting, but not about a specific project. And according to ordinance, there's supposed to be a project when there's a rezoning. So I'm concerned that that piece, the specificity of that, has been lost, and I'd like you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right. With that, I will close public comment. And for just point of clarification, Mr. Cox, do you want us to read this into the record and take a motion before we open up questions in council?
That's the typical protocol.
Okay. All right. Shakti, will you please read ordinance 2016-1.
I move for the adoption of ordinance 2016-1 on second and final reading based on the findings of fact of the Planning Commission dated September 17th, 2014.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second, and I'll just start down the line from my right to my left. Councilor Vincent.
I just have a quick question, because I found this verbiage interesting and I have not heard it before. So no grease traps. Am I to assume then that that means no McDonald's, but you can have a Starbucks? Can somebody? Anybody?
Again, Vince Harris with Baseline. Yeah, that was the concern, and Steve and Sandy can nod their head yes or no, but the concern was they didn't want a restaurant that was cooking an exorbitant amount of food that requires a grease trap. The health department would require a grease trap with cooking food, indoors, and it going through a filter system, et cetera, and then there's a grease trap to catch the grease. So if you want to picture the Starbucks doesn't cook food. They might heat something up in a microwave. So the Burger Kings, the McDonald's, that type of use would require a grease trap, so therefore would not be permitted.
So deeded in there would prohibit those sort of.
Yeah, that's correct, with the deed restriction with the grease trap.
Okay, thank you.
I guess if McDonald's ever figured out how to not cook with,
then they could.
but that wouldn't require a grease trap. So
okay, thank you.
While you're there, I think we'll go through questions. 1 second. There was something you said about a brew pub, and you said that there was a recommendation by the neighborhood to limit that at 1,500, but you felt like going to 2,000. Have you reconciled that?
I did talk to Steve Payne over the phone. I believe it was last week. I can't remember. It was maybe the week before. I can't remember. But we talked about the difference in the square footage. The concern on the previous to last week, the kind of the concept that was brought up was the 1,500 square feet limitation. Concern for the most part with the Sherwood building or house, as I showed you on that site plan, that seems like the one building that could probably stay as a single building to be used in the future. The limitation on the 1,500 square feet would create a imposition on that building. You have to cut out part of it or not use part of it or make sure you got 2 users in it or something like that. So that was the concern there. So it was on our side, it was increased from 1,500 square feet limitation to a 2,000 square foot.
Okay.
So,
also Roy Ball.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick clarification. If you can elaborate a little bit more about the stormwater on Quincy, Wadsworth, on the north and west side, and then again on the south and east corner, all the way around the property. Curb and gutter, stormwater in the front on Quincy. You kind of touched a little bit on it, but you didn't really elaborate too much. Can you give me a little more what you're looking at?
Yeah, I'll answer the best as I can right now. I know Ann Hine is here, so she can probably elaborate on the future improvements in the drainage. But essentially, the drainage on this property right now, property meaning the 3 properties, essentially those properties, when rain comes and it flows off the property, it essentially flows to the south. So it sheet flows onto their neighbors' properties to the south. So when development would happen here is essentially there would be a, lack of a better term, a swale that would be created on the south side of the property, direct those flows over towards the west, towards Wadsworth, and get them into the channel that goes along, the drainage channel that goes along South Wadsworth Boulevard. Now, that's water landing on the property. There is not curb and gutter now, today, along the south side of Quincy. When these properties develop, the public improvements agreement that the property owners have already signed So when those properties develop, that public improvements agreement kicks in and would require those improvements along Quincy Avenue on the south side that would include curb, gutter, sidewalk, any widening that might be needed there for any radiuses or extra asphalt, et cetera. And so those improvements would go in. Essentially, those would channel the flows on the south side of Quincy. When it lands on the asphalt, gets into the curb, it would flow back again towards the west to the intersection and get into the storm drain that is further down Wadsworth.
Okay, just a real quick clarification. On the west side on Wadsworth, you have the storm drains that are there. They should be underneath the street somewhere, possibly. Would you guys attach the stormwater to them from the south side going west? From your east side on the south side going west to Wadsworth?
I think I'll let Ann Hine answer that question.
Okay, thank you.
I don't believe so. I think our storm drainage will stay on the east side of Wadsworth.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Ann Hines, City Engineer, Public Works Department. I do have a slide that will show this in a little more detail. These are the three properties that you've seen before. Wadsworth is on the left side of the screen. Quincy is on the top of the screen. As Mr. Harris indicated, currently the developed flow from the single-family homes is sheet flow. It's broad and it travels through the backyards and into the adjacent backyards. This is very similar to any single-family development in Lakewood where we have lower lots and drainage from one lot goes into the other lot. But it's sheet flow, it's spread across the whole property line. With development, the current proposal is to create a detention area on the south side of the three lots. And that detention area would discharge through a pipe system into the existing swale and pipe system in Wadsworth.
That answered my question. Thank you.
Councilor Harrison.
Oh, good, I have a list. First question, could we have I think it was Mr. Harris's slide back up that shows the property at an angle? Again, could we have that? Because I think it'll make a little bit more sense. You can see what I'm talking about when I ask these questions. First of all, could someone address the widening of Quincy and Wadsworth in that area? Because one of the things that I'm concerned about is if you can see from this particular drawing, we go, and I'm going east on Quincy. It goes from 2 lanes down to 1 lane, and the 1 lane would be almost exactly where you were showing where the entrance would be. And my concern would be, when I went by there the other evening, I almost got rear-ended by somebody coming up behind me. I had to quickly pull into one of those lots there and got a funny look from one of the people sitting there wondering what I was doing pulling in their yard. My concern is that we may need a deceleration lane in there, or else there needs to be some additional widening of Quincy. Because if we're going to have a parking lot that showed multiple cars in there, I'm assuming this is going to be a traffic hazard to go from 2 lanes down to 1 lane. And Mr. Patton, maybe you would address that? I see him looking at papers back there.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I'm John Payton. I'm the Traffic Engineering Manager for the City of Lakewood. A traffic impact study was done for this site. It is a load generator of trips. Therefore, when we widen this, they'll be installing curb and gutter and walk across their 2 parcels, which will have 2 lanes all the way across. And then it'll taper back in
across the undeveloped lots.
So there'll be 2 whole lanes all the way across there?
Correct.
Okay. And then it'll go back down to 1 lane after that? So
Correct.
the Lockmore Drive-In is about 2 blocks down there, isn't it, as I remember? Okay.
Correct. And then within the city of Denver, it goes into a collector because it really kind of fizzles out to the east.
Okay, and are there plans? I know the county's been working with the other direction going west, but do you know if there's plans widening Quincy across there from on the east side? Going
Just up to Pierce Street.
Just to Pierce.
And it probably won't even go across the 2 parcels to the east of this that are undeveloped.
So that's just east of the Pinehurst Country Club, correct?
Correct. That's
Okay.
where we'll match it.
And then it'll still go down to 2 lanes again? Okay, because there's a hill right in there that's a little tricky. Okay.
And at Denver.
Okay, all right. So I think I'm done with you, John. Thank you very much.
Everybody else done with
Yeah, let's. Are there other traffic questions while Mr. Payton is here? Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you. If I understand it correctly, we're anticipating growth on the north side of Quincy.
Correct.
This traffic study is good for what's on the south side of Quincy.
Correct, but they also include background traffic, which shows a 1% growth for each year, which accommodates all undeveloped parcels within the area.
So this traffic study is looking at potential growth on the north side. Okay.
Can I follow up to that?
Certainly.
Guess I can. See, thank you. And if a project does come into play across the street, then they'll be subject to doing traffic impacts and a traffic study if it changes?
They've already submitted.
Okay. Councilor Abel.
Just traffic at the moment?
Start with traffic.
Okay. It would seem that if a large senior citizens facility goes in across the street to the north, that would be more than 1% growth a year. Am I wrong there? Am I?
Yeah, because when you're looking at 30 years of growth is what they're looking at. This would only be 1 parcel. They would be looking at the entire area. So the growth, 1% growth rate is a large number. I've really never really seen, even Wadsworth doesn't grow at 1%.
What's the daily traffic count along there now?
I'm going to look at this.
Thank you.
It's around 10,000 cars a day.
Okay. The assortment of uses that would be available under the deed restrictions, they wouldn't add significantly to that traffic flow?
No, this traffic study actually used one of the highest generating trip generators as a medical office. So they were very conservative in their calculations.
Thank you. I have other questions having to do with the procedure as opposed to traffic. Shall I go with it?
So no more traffic? All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Payton.
Oh, you have more? Okay, I'll come back to you. Light up again. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. This thing's been in the works quite a while. And it came at a peculiar time when we were on the cusp of going from one zoning ordinance to the new altered zoning ordinance. So in the process, the first neighborhood meeting was September 27, 2012. And we presented a plan for a mixed-use neighborhood suburban zoning that didn't exist at the time. It was 2 months later before the zoning ordinance, the altered zoning ordinance was passed. It seems to me that we anticipated a council vote that was yet to come, and I have some concern about that. Can you address that, Mr. Parker?
I think by the time we got to the end of 2012, we had been working with council for a long time on that coming zoning ordinance. And while there had been no vote yet, we had been through multiple study sessions, and we were working with a lot of developers on the time who were awaiting that decision to submit their new projects. If council had not approved that new zoning ordinance, we would have stuck with the old one and they would have submitted, but we had a lot of projects that waited until early 2013 to submit under the new zoning ordinance.
My concern is it's difficult for the neighborhood to get their arms around something that's not yet in existence.
Fair enough.
Perhaps next time, and this has been in the process for a long time, Mr. Harris and Mr. Clem. It's I would hate to add another couple of months to that, but it might be wiser in the future to wait until we have the rules on the ground before we start processing or discussing it with the neighbors. During that hearing, there were a couple of things that were mentioned that seem a bit curious to me. In one instance on the deed restriction, Mr. Doring, the caseworker at the time, said the city does not require deed restrictions, nor can it enforce them. And granted, this is from the new zoning ordinance that wasn't in effect at the time, but it says 17.1.6.2, item C. It is not the intent of the zoning ordinance to interfere with, abrogate, or annul any easement, covenant, deed restriction, or other agreement between private parties, which would seem to fly in the face of what the neighborhood was told. In addition, the federal government and the state government in housing grants rely on deed restrictions in order to enforce low-income and moderate-income housing requirements. A developer, in order to get the tax breaks for those things, has to enter into a deed restriction. So I would suppose then that they are enforceable. Mr. Cox?
They are. The question is who enforces them, and it would not typically be the municipality if the municipality is not a party to them.
No, but according to this, municipality recognizes them. That's correct?
Right.
Thank you. There was another question that arose during the neighborhood meeting, and it was about the possibility of having the development proceed with a PUD, a planned urban development, or PD, I'm sorry. Staff stated that under the new zoning regulations, I'm assuming those were the regulations to come, the PD zoning would not be allowed as the properties are too small to meet the proposed minimum 5-acre size requirement, as they total only 2.4 acres. It's my understanding that the director may, under the new zoning ordinance 17.3.6.2 applicability, the director may reduce the required minimum size of a PD district if it is determined the proposed district will still meet the intent of the PD zone identified in section 17.3.6.1. So again, I believe that information given to the neighbors was a bit misleading as well. And where's the other? Well, anyway, those two examples kind of illustrate my concern that we're going a bit too hastily on some things, moving ahead before it gets passed, and on other things, wrongfully dismissing the questions of the neighborhood. So just a thought about the process in the future. Thank you.
I'll go back to Councilor Harrison.
Actually, I think the deed restriction question was my question, so I think we addressed what could be done. So thank you very much.
Councilor Franks.
I just had a couple things. One, I wanted to address the aerial utility lines to just understand what can or cannot be done. I didn't get a feel for what can and can't be done by reading the documentation. So could somebody speak to that? Can we enforce the burial of those lines to aesthetically improve the area, or is that not something we can enforce and we can simply just ask for it to be included?
Ann Hine, Public Works Department. The public improvements agreement requires the existing poles to be relocated in order to get the curb gutter and sidewalk in place. It does not require that the developer bury the lines. However, we have agreed to look at this at the time of development and see if it would fit into our what we normally call the 1% fund through Excel to have those lines buried. But without a project, we can't commit to that.
Understood, and that actually leads directly into my next question was, Ms. Wenger had asked and said that there was no project specificity and that was a requirement, and I wanted to learn more about that.
There's no requirement in the zoning section of to submit a rezoning for a project. Absolutely, a site can be rezoned. That's why we have zoning districts. The term project comes in the neighborhood meeting. There's a sentence in there that says the neighbors shall be allowed to. Maybe I can read it to get it right. No, that's all right. It says the purpose of a neighborhood meeting is to engage the neighbors in the immediate vicinity for a land development in an initial zoning, rezoning, or special use permit to solicit their input on how the project will interact with the surrounding area. And a lot of these things, like a special use permit, is a development. We call that a project. I think there's no intent here that we have to have an exact development to be a project. I think in this case, the rezoning is the project that we're determining its compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood.
Okay, and my follow-on question is, when these conceptual site plans are being shown, like in meetings like this, my experience is that we're often showing best case scenario. I wanted to understand if the neighborhoods had been shown, basically, I don't want to call it worst case scenario, but the kind of maximum, kind of the edges of the boundaries of that. Were they shown that so they could see kind of that vision from one end to the other to understand what could be there based on the rezoning?
So the question is about the sort of the range of alternatives, and I'll ask Mr. Harris if he could explain sort of the range of alternatives that were presented.
Vince Harris at Baseline. So through the course of evaluating this property, we looked at the standards that are in the MNS zone district. We looked at the square footage that we could get onto the property. We looked at the open space requirements and the parking requirements. That site plan accommodates all of those. There's not much more square footage you can put onto that property without continuing to meet the open space, landscaping, and parking requirements. So that's approximately about the amount of maximum square footage. I suppose you could add a second story to a building. Those are all intended to be one-story type buildings. You could add a second story and put parking underneath. That will get you additional parking, but that's more costly. We're not envisioning that that's probably the likelihood of that, but yeah, we've shown that, and we've had a couple different iterations of that plan, and the one that I showed you tonight is the one that we've used most often. But we've had other proposals. One of the concepts that the neighborhood has continued on is they'd rather not see one large building, and that's why the neighborhood kind of suggested that we go towards rezoning these 3 properties as opposed to, doing all 5 properties that fronted to Quincy, that you'd end up with 1, maybe 2 projects here on these properties, and then maybe someday later the other 2 properties would do something. So we've had a variety of different ones, but that's the one that we've used for our engineering analysis and our conceptual analysis.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilor Gutwein?
Thank you. My question was also about the power lines, so I think that was covered. And just a quick comment on the collaboration between the neighborhood and in this process. It's good to hear and see that the neighborhood's wishes were considered. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilor Abel, question?
Question and a comment. Would you please read, Mr. Parker, there is more to the neighborhood meeting verbiage there. Would you read the rest of that paragraph? I believe it has the word mitigate.
At the neighborhood meeting, the applicant shall provide information to the neighbors on the proposed land development, solicit feedback from neighbors, and discuss potential ways to mitigate neighbors' concerns.
Thank you. Your definition of project, I believe Webster's dictionary refers to it as the details of a plan, and that the use of the word project as a whole, the way you quoted it, is archaic, according to the dictionary. Webster's, I believe, is what the Colorado courts rely on, Mr. Cox, when there's a question about word meaning.
That's one source, yeah.
But it is generally the current and plain use meaning of the word.
Generally speaking, yeah.
Thank you. So project would require some detail there, according to the dictionary. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could somebody please speak to what kind of consideration has been given to the buffer zone? I am finding that buffers have different meanings to different people.
Okay, so thank you for your question about the buffer zone. So by the zoning ordinance, the required buffer would be one of these 4 options that I showed in the slide here. So that first option, it could be trees and shrubs for a depth of 30 feet. And then it proceeds, it gets a little bit narrower with more landscaping. And then where the last option is the option D with a masonry wall, but where, as you could see in the picture, there could be parking that's up adjacent to that wall. Did that answer your question?
It did, but have you given any consideration as to what type of buffer you'd be looking at? There's a big difference between A and D, I think it is. Yeah, that's the point. You don't know what it's going to be.
Just to respond on behalf of the applicant, there isn't a project per se to build a specific user, specific building at all on this property. Until such time as the property is rezoned, people don't sign up and start wanting to put development plans together. So it could be a combination. My guess would be a combination of the lower 2 options, C and or D, or a combination of the 2 of those. It really depends on where the parking ends up on the property, where the drainage is, where the landscaping is. Obviously, there'd be a buffer in between. If the drainage is, again, those are what you've seen and what we've given to Public Works Department. Those are preliminary conceptual type of designs. Someone might want to come in and they might want to decide that they do underground detention, which would accommodate parking right up to the rear property line. But I don't envision that. I envision that there would be a detention pond along the south side of the property that would include the ability to have obviously grasses and trees and stuff along the south property line, which would be what the developer would want to have, is some type of a landscape buffer between them and the neighborhood, and provide that. So today, there is no user intended for the property today, but the likelihood of option C and D is very, very likely. Certainly option C right now, it already exists. There's already a fence in between the properties and there's trees. Not as many trees, but there'll be more trees.
Councilor Harrison.
I just wanted to kind of go back over the process to make sure that I'm really clear with what we're doing here, especially with the new comprehensive plan in place. So in the old days, when we looked at and I'll use the word project or a development, we had both a rezone on that property as well as an actual site plan where it showed potential buildings and parking lots and whatnot. It was a combined process that we were looking at. With the new comprehensive plan and the new zoning ordinance, we've uncoupled those two steps. So now a property can come in and actually be rezoned to a different use, then which gives the property owners the right to go out and negotiate a sale of that property. Then the site plan will be developed that'll show where the buffers are and where the trees are and where the driveway is and where the building is. And the planning department would be looking at that plat or the property and say, yes, it agrees with our designs. We want trees here and we want the driveway here and we want the power lines. Do I have that correct?
You do. So when you talk about the old day, under the old code, everything was negotiated on every property, right? We got into details, and what happened is we ended up writing different rules for every property in the city. And that is not something that's sustainable from an enforcement perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from a staffing perspective. So one of the changes in the new zoning code was to create uniform rules. So we have a set number of zoning districts, and everybody in a certain zoning district follows the same rules. And we're not writing individual zoning districts for individual pieces of property, which is what happens if we start playing around with the site plan on this site and playing around with the use list on this site and making it different from every other site in the city. So that's the distinction now, is under the old zone, individual rules for individual parcels. Under the new plan, we've created different sets of rules, and we decide which set of rules, you decide which set of rules to apply to a certain property.
So right now, because we don't have Subway and Starbucks lined up to sign the contract, we can't look at them as the property owners. We're looking at just what the property could be used for.
Even if you did have Subway or Starbucks interested in this property, you'd still be approving that zone district, which might allow something other than Starbucks.
Correct. Because whoever buys it could turn around and sell it to something else, and as long as they were using it for the zoning that we approved tonight, that new owner could use it for whatever they wanted to, as long as it's approved by planning.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councilor Abel.
Councilor Harrison mentioned the new comprehensive plan. Can we consider the new comprehensive plan in the context of this rezoning?
No, as mentioned earlier, this application is under the previous comprehensive plan. References that Mr. Parker explanation were to the previous zoning code versus the current zoning code. And while I have this opportunity, I just want to reiterate or piggyback on what Travis was saying about the process. The rules in the old code had certain requirements that don't exist any longer. But it has always been true that when you rezone to a straight zone district versus a planned unit development, the question is this property compatible with the surrounding uses if it is zoned MNS? And to determine that, you look at the list of uses allowed in that zone district, you look at the standards, you look at the setbacks, you look at all of those things, and decide, would any of these businesses, any of these uses be compatible with the surrounding area, because if we allow this rezoning to this straight zone district, it will open the door for all of those uses. Now, in this case, you have an applicant proposing to eliminate some of those uses, but as a rule with the straight zoning, is that zone district compatible with the surrounding uses? And that would be true whether there's a sale of the property or if this developer changed his mind and said, I showed you a conceptual site plan of this kind of use, but I got a better deal to do this other use that's also allowed in that zone district. Again, a PUD, I used to see more PUDs than anything else, and those got you accustomed to, I think, seeing the very details of the proposal because that's what was on the table. Now, different applicants present different ways, and sometimes you'll get an application where they tell you, we're rezoning to this straight zone district, but we're planning to do this use, and here's a picture of what it might look like. Others will come in and say, it's rezoning to this zone district, and all of these uses are in play. We might do this, we might do that. They're not obligated to commit to any one use at that time because all of them are available under the law.
Okay, so that exhausts the questions. I'm just going to throw a comment out there. And from my experience, just 8 years on council, it's very rare that we have the opportunity where you have neighbors and the developer in the same room talking, working on things for years. So my hat's off to this whole group for sitting down and trying to be proactive to see what you want at your corner. And I think that's the most important part of what we've heard is what you want at your corner in your neighborhood. And so I support this wholeheartedly, this rezone. And again, hopefully moving forward, we'll continue to see this partnership between developers and the community. Any other comments? Councilor Abel.
I do want to say that this is the way our zoning law should work. The neighbors get together with the developer, and they work together to make the community a better place for everybody. And despite my comments over the process, I think the applicant and the neighbors have worked together very well, and I'll be supporting this.
Anybody else wish to speak? All right. There's been a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. All right. And it passes 10-1, the no being Councilor Mayor Pro Tem Johnson. Dana, did you have a comment? Okay. All right. So congratulations and thank you for all your work. I also want to thank our staff for the presentation and the hard work you've done as well. The clerk, please read item 13 into the record.
Item 13, ordinance 2016-2, changing the southerly portions of O'Kane and Washington Heights parks from open space and park purposes to open space, park, and public street purposes to accommodate existing and new improvements along West First Avenue.
All right. So I will now open public hearing on this proposed ordinance. I think there's one person who's signed up. That's Miss Trish Merkel. And on her way down, we'll wish you a happy birthday. Looks like you really want to have a good time tonight, huh? This is a great place to spend your birthday night. Good evening, welcome.
Good evening. Thanks, Mayor Paul, council members. My name is Trish Merkel. I'm a resident in Ward 2. And as president of the O'Kane Park Neighborhood Association, I'm here representing our board of directors and the residents and association members in our association. And I am here to encourage you to support this. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for getting a sidewalk in our neighborhood. We know that sidewalks are not a trivial thing. And as you look at the map of the area between Washington Heights and O'Kane Park, you see that there is not a sidewalk, and there is a bike lane there. What you can't see unless you are in the neighborhood is that that bike lane is used by pedestrians and people with motorized wheelchairs. There are the cyclists there, also horses use that bike lane, and golf carts. So we certainly appreciate and support this to approve this sidewalk in our neighborhood. So thank you for helping to continue to make our neighborhood safe. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll get you out of here so you can go have some fun still. Anybody else wish to speak on this item? Not seeing any, I'll close public comment. I'll ask for a motion, please.
I move for the adoption of ordinance 2016-2 on second and final reading.
Second.
Thank you. There's been a motion and a second, and questions or conversation from council. All right, not seeing any, I will ask you to vote. That's an easy one. Carries 11 ayes, 0 nays. Happy birthday. Okay, will the clerk please read item 9 back into the record?
Resolution 2016-11, approving a legal services agreement with the firm of Mechow, Cox, and McCaskill LLP.
All right. And so just to kind of give a quick update to the audience, those folks who are tuned in into council, our city attorney left.
He just took a very quick break. He'll be right back. I bet he didn't realize this was going to come up so quick.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So, welcome back, sir. So this is our city attorney is changing firms, or there's been a reorganization of this firm, which requires approval by this body to accept the new organization. There's not an increase in regular compensation here. Other than we're actually getting more of you for the same price. We're getting 4 days dedicated to the city of Lakewood, and anything beyond those 4 days, there is an increase of $5 an hour. The city of Lakewood has a unique and efficient model by hiring out our city attorney. So we contract with Tim. He's an independent contractor, not an employee of the city. And that allows us to be efficient, and also allows Tim to then go out and get experts in different areas that we need experts along the lines. So with that, I will, guess there's not a presentation because the City Attorney Cox has met with every council member individually already and expressed kind of what's going on in the situation at hand. So I will then open the public comment on item 9, and with that I have Mr. Tom Stalker.
Thank you, Mayor. New councilors, new mayor. Tom Stalker. I live in Ward 4. Lived here since 1978. I'm an attorney. I'm a contract attorney. I litigate contracts. I write contracts. I've had my own practice for 28 years, been an attorney for 31 years. I would never, ever allow a client of mine to sign a contract that Mr. Cox has proposed. And I'll tell you why. This is a sweetheart deal. This is a contract for lifetime employment with a 3% per year increase. I'd love to have that. I don't know how many of you have a 3% per year built into your salaries, but I don't know of any other employee or contractor of City of Lakewood that gets this kind of a deal. It's a sweetheart deal, was written by Mr. Cox for Mr. Cox, was not written for this city. And I'll go through the contract briefly and tell you why. Paragraph 1B, and I'm just going to highlight a few things that jumped out at me. I don't know why the city is involved in advertising Mr. Cox's law firm. That, to me, is not proper. That's paragraph 1B. Paragraph 1C, or 2C, rather. Mr. Cox controls the hiring of outside counsel. I've dealt with Mr. Cox on the 2090 South Wright Street litigation. He did not impress me. The counsel that he hired for litigation counsel did not impress me. Mr. Cox tells you what you want to hear. He doesn't tell you what you should hear. An attorney's job is to tell you what you don't want to hear, not what you want to hear. In that whole litigation, you were told what you wanted to hear. Some of you weren't here then, but that was how that came down. Definitely disagree with that. Paragraph 1, 3B. Paragraph 3B is the whole compensation thing. And as the mayor pointed out, maybe it's a little bit less, but what he loses in the apples, he makes up in the oranges, because he sticks on his staff and paralegals and other attorneys, and they all get increases every year as well, and they're billed at higher hourly rates. So if I'm a good law firm manager, I put a lot of their time into the bill. 3I is the 3% per year escalator. Let's see if I got that right. Again, I mentioned that. Yeah, it's 3I. The biggest thing that strikes me about this contract, and I think it's unethical, is that fundamentally in attorney-client relationships, the client chooses the attorney. The attorney doesn't choose the client. Here we've got a permanent contract. I know there's a way out of it. You have it 90 days and blah, 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 blah. It seems to me that this contract is written,
please. Thank you.
is written so that you can't easily get out of it. Last comment. I think you were going to be a little flexible, Mr. Mayor, is the arbitration provision. Arbitration is not what you want. The business of the city is the business of the people. Mr. Cox has a confidential arbitration provision in here, which means nobody ever knows what happened. That's wrong. So I would strongly recommend that you not approve this contract. Go with something that's a year-to-year renewal that you have
Thank
to.
you, Mr. Stalker.
That you have to
Thank
renew.
you, sir. All right, anybody else wish to comment? Swanger?
Good evening again. Heather Wenger. Regarding the request to increase Mr. Cox's contract or renew it, firstly, the focus of tonight needs to be on accepting the original proposal to change the name of the firm to reflect Mr. Cox's new firm. That was the original item that everybody was consulted with and discussed with, is my understanding. The time to renegotiate a contract is when A, the contract is up for renewal, and B, the public has had more notice, and C, and I think the most important item, is when a study session has occurred with council, with staff, with Mr. Cox, when you are apprised of both the successes and the failures of your counsel, Mr. Cox and his firm, analysis of current workload to justify the increased work hours that he's asking for, the increased money that he's asking for, whether this would decrease reliance on other expert outside counsel costs, and the pros and cons of a contract that has no end. In addition to this, I would just like to suggest an annual review of the city attorney's work, not a simple acceptance of a report that he sends you at the end of each year. After all, the city invests a lot of money in legal fees and its attorney. The city council should play an active role in determining whether the city is getting its money's worth. Thank you.
Anybody else in chambers? All right, with that, I will close public comment, and I think there'll probably be some questions. I'll just add that this contract can be ended at any time by this party. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Wickman?
In light of the late hour, I've got a lot of things to say, so let me pass out a flyer that has got my thoughts, so if I don't have a chance to say them, you get a chance to read them. I'm going to start off with number one. My pet peeve is that, we got to give more notification to the public. The lack of notification is very real in this situation. You brought up a few weeks ago to us that this was coming, but of course the devil's in the details. And I asked that we do not do the old routine of waiting until Friday in order to let the public know what's going on. Well, you honored that in the sense that you told us on Wednesday about the indefinite contract. So I appreciate the additional 48 hours. But my point is we need to be giving the public adequate notification, and there hasn't been any. Second thing I'm concerned about, what Mr. Stocker wrote up about the conflict of interest. We have Mr. Cox writing the contract for us, and if that isn't a conflict of interest, I don't know what is. And I suspect that really opens us up to potential legal problems in the future. I noticed you made an observation that our purchasing policy doesn't require that we put these things out to bid. And while the purchasing policy gives us discretion, we can put things out to bid. The requirement about putting things out to bid, that requirement is not applicable here, but I think it's appropriate here. Now, number one, I think we need to be giving this the important consideration that it deserves. My concern is, we've got this 2 weeks, 2 days, whatever, and then we're going to spend the next hour to pass on this. And we're being very cursory in this whole consideration, and that's inappropriate. The council only has 2 basic functions in life. Number one is to set policy, passing ordinances and resolutions, and number 2, managing city employees. Now, when I say that, there's only 3 employees that we actually manage. That is the judges, the city manager, and the city attorney. So we only have these 3 employees to manage. And to sit there and not give it the consideration it deserves is negligence and irresponsible, and I think would be a violation of our fiduciary responsibility, which is why I'd like to raise the issue of fiduciary responsibilities. We have a duty to be a good steward of the people's assets, and that means we need to be bending over backwards to make sure that we're getting the best possible value for our legal services. We haven't given this any consideration at all. Near as I can tell, the last time we looked at our legal firm was 10 years ago, and even then I'm not sure, and I guess this will be a question mark. I'll interrupt my train of thought with a question. 10 years ago when you got the contract, how many other firms did we look at that point?
I have no idea, Counselor. I was not part of the process.
Kathy, you remember how many we looked at?
I can't tell you specifically, but I can think of 3 or 4 that made it to the final rounds, and that was a while ago, but it was certainly more than 1.
All right. Anyway, it's been 10 years. It's inappropriate to let this thing go, for 10 years and let it keep on going. For this thing to be an indefinite term, now we talked about we have the right to fire at any time. Well, we have that in the current contract. It's part of our code. It's part of our charter, et cetera, et cetera. There's no doubt that we can let the council go at any time we want. But if we don't have a term, if he has an indefinite term, then we're not forcing ourselves to look at the situation. And if we just automatically assume that the status quo is the way to go, we're not going to make any progress. It's our responsibility to take a look at this thing seriously and not rubber stamp this tonight. So with that in mind, what I would suggest is that obviously we have to retain Cox's firm for the time being, and that's only fair. We have a contract. That contract goes up until August 31st of 2017, so a little over a year from now. So what I would suggest is that we modify this to keep the term that we have right now, which is the August 31st, 2017, a little over a year from now, and we keep the current contract. And then in the meantime, we've got over a year to take a look at this and fulfill our responsibility to the people that we've actually made sure that we've got the best possible legal services that we have. So with that in mind, I get an awful lot to say. But anyway, my suggestion is that we modify this contract to remove that evergreen provision and leave the term of August 31st, 2017, and then afterwards we have a search committee or whatever to look at our possibilities, not only other firms, but maybe we want to have a permanent employee. I don't know what the answer is, and it may very well turn out that what we have may turn out to be the right way, but we can't assume that. And right now, if we sit there and rubber stamp this, we're assuming that we've got the best possible service, and we don't know that. And it'll be irresponsible for us to act without doing our research. Thank you.
Okay, and for just quick clarification, your contract was actually revisited and renewed 3 years ago, correct?
The original contract from 2007 so coming up on 9 years now, was a 5-year contract. It was renewed by the City Council within that 5-year period, so in 2012, for another 5 years through August of 2017. If I may, Mr. Mayor, because I suspect others may have questions or concerns about the term of the contract, and that's what you've heard about from the speakers so far. What was discussed with the council members a couple of weeks ago was another 5-year term. It was going to be another term that was identical to the current agreement. Based on comments I heard from several council members, that change was made to emphasize the fact that this is terminable at any time pursuant to the terms of the contract. We remain more than willing to talk about a definite term. It is not in that contract for the benefit of the law firm. It's in there because there was expressed concern about 5 years being too far in the future to reconsider the contract, and I again repeatedly said that it is a contract that can be reviewed at any time, whether there's an end date on it or not. So if council's prerogative is to attach a time frame, a termination date to that, or a renewal date to that, we're more than happy to do that. That's what we proposed in the first instance.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Abel.
When we discussed this, Tim, 5 years didn't come up with me, but other things did. I have, my thought is that we go ahead and continue this to 2017 under the terms of the original contract. The impetus for this is the split of your law firm and the name change. And certainly I think we need to pay you or to engage the proper firm. So I'm for that. Section 4.6 of the charter says the city attorney shall serve at the pleasure of city council. I kind of like that lopsided thing there. You know, you serve at our pleasure, we don't serve at yours. So we can talk about that again in 2017. That's how I'm looking at this. Thank you.
Councilor Franks.
Thank you. I've just got a couple different aspects to explore. One is the independent review. We had a Ward 4 meeting on Saturday in which this contract came up, and I was asked repeatedly, and then again through email, if any independent review has been done by another attorney.
No, not that I've been involved with. I can't say that anybody else hasn't solicited that, but we did not propose that.
The other thing I wanted to understand is, are we as a council, basically I did some research on evergreen laws and what other cities are doing and municipalities, and are we permitted to bind future councils by an evergreen clause? Is there anything in the city charter that prohibits us from entering into a contract that has an evergreen clause?
If the contract did not provide for the ability to terminate, and if the charter did not provide for the fact that that we serve at the pleasure of the council, and the future councils were bound to honor that contract and keep that contract in place, that would be a problem. But because the contract by its own terms provides for termination at any time for any reason, it's not truly an evergreen clause.
Okay, no, that helps. Again, just asking questions that, we need to make sure people know they've been heard. And the other thing is, this is more of a comment on my own, is that psychologically there's a big difference between a contract that has a termination date, even if I'm working with a company that I just love. The fact that I have a termination date in there gives me a chance to kind of review, go back through, make sure the rates are appropriate, make sure the services are appropriate. And that's, in my view, a friendly process. I'm kind of getting in front of somebody and kind of saying, hey, do we want to continue our relationship? The concern I have about the termination is that's always seen as a negative, at least in every circumstance I've ever been involved in. And I think what it does for me is it sets it up to where it then becomes an adversarial process. And so that becomes my core concern, is psychologically, if we were to pass that today, another council may not feel as free to re-explore. And as Tim Cox and I have had meetings recently, so it's not a matter of dissatisfaction with the service, it's simply a matter of trying to understand what that long-term looks like and what that vision is. And I just think psychologically that's kind of more of an editorial comment, but I just think terminations are much more difficult than a review process and period. And certainly some of the other comments that have been made, those are concerns that constituents have shared with me as well. So thank you.
Councillor Harrison.
Tim, when you and I met, I know that you did talk about the 5-year contract. There wasn't any discussion at that point at a time. I know that you also said that you serve at the pleasure of council. What I'm going to suggest is to make a lot of people happier up here. It might be that we would modify the contract to say 5 years and include all the rest of the language that's in here. You have done really good work for the city, and I don't have any problems with renewing. I do like the idea of a 5-year contract better. Kathy has a contract length of term, and I think that gives us a little bit more comfort in the fact that should either you or we decide that we need to make changes, we kind of know what that time frame is. But I don't want to terminate any sooner than 5 years. So
thank you.
You've done great work.
Is that a motion?
That is an amendment. Well, it's not a motion yet because we don't have a motion on the floor, do we?
No.
No. So now I have all kinds of lights. Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Tim, I just want to start out by saying I'm actually your friend. But when I read through this contract, I've got some concerns. All of us that are employed have yearly evaluations. All of us. And I think it's fair that you have that as well, frankly. Kathy has a yearly evaluation. When I was at Centura, you knew it was coming. We all have that when any business we're in. That needs to be added here someplace. I'm not sure how we came up with this, and I still don't understand how come we can't go out to a bid process. Frankly, I think it's appropriate for us to look at other law firms, see what they offer, see what the option is between us retaining you, looking at other law firms versus actually hiring an attorney on our own and having just our own in place. That's fair, and it needs to be reviewed. That's what our responsibility is up here. It's interesting. I've heard different times that people feel that this should stay in place till 2017. Earlier today, I was more in favor of, frankly, a sunset of December the 31st, which is fair to you. That has many months in place for all of us to be giving this some thought. And frankly, for us to at least have the option of looking at other law firms and what it looks like with other cities, do some discovery. See if they have attorneys on staff, how that's working. I frankly would prefer a sunset of December 31st. I am a little bit concerned of a conflict of interest with you writing your own contract. That does seem odd to me. You know, when you're hired by anybody, you have a job description that is told to you. I did not tell my employer what my job description was going to be. And to me, this kind of feels like we're doing things backward. So I'm your friend, but I still have concerns about what we're doing here. And
I'll just clarify, though, it's important to remember Tim is not an employee. he is a contractor. It's a big difference. Councilmember Roybal.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Johnson pretty much said a lot what I was hearing from my constituents. What I would recommend to you would be that we as council extend the present contract till your due date of August 2017 and give the city an opportunity to set up in place a review process and take a look at the process of your firm. And obviously your presentation is very important, but look at outside and see what else is the best for the city. What other law firms and what they have to propose. I would also like to see in this contract is some type of review, an independent review of your law firm. There might be another possibility that I'm looking at and would look at a little closer, is that in the last 10 years, we looked at having an outside law firm represent us. Didn't we have somebody prior to 10 years that we had an in-house attorney that was representing us? Did we have somebody like that?
I can explain the history because it's a little bit unusual. There was an attorney hired by the city in the very early days and around the time of incorporation. And a few years later, the firm of Gorsuch Curtis was first retained to provide the city attorney services by contract. Same kind of arrangement we've been dealing with. The person who filled that role was Roger Noonan, and Roger Noonan was a contract city attorney through Gorsuch Curtis for some 25 years. Around the 25th year, that firm fell apart, dissolved, and a number of the attorneys went elsewhere. We still confer with some of those attorneys on specialized matters like real estate and so on. When that happened, Mr. Noonan, the deputy city attorney, the prosecutors, the prosecution assistants, the staff that helps the prosecutors, were all employees of Gorsuch Curtis, the law firm. They were all out of work when the firm dissolved. The city decided to bring them all in as employees at that time, and they all became employees at that time. The deputy city attorney, the police legal advisor, the prosecutors and staff are all still city employees. When Mr. Noonan retired, that's when the process was put out to bid to find a new city attorney, and the decision was made to go with an outside city attorney, an outside contract rather than employment. So that's you did have an employed city attorney because he came in-house after that firm ceased to be.
Right. So I'd like to maybe suggest strongly that possibly we extend your contract till August of 2017, and it gives us an opportunity to review our options and move forward and see what's best for the city. So that's my comment.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm going to just bring this so we can, my apologies to council, I need to have a motion in a second. Then we can, I think, will give us a better direction to continue this conversation.
Draw my point.
Thank you.
I move for the adoption of Resolution 2016-11.
Second.
All right. Councilwoman Franks.
Just continuing the discussion, I basically wanted to kind of concur with Pete on that I would be in favor of kind of mainly just the name change and keeping the term in place based on my own concerns about those psychological aspects I talked about earlier, and also based on the feedback from my constituents. Thank you.
Councilor Koop.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to ask City Manager Hodson her opinion or advice or what you've seen in the past as far as time frames and cost for going out and seeing what else is out there, seeing who else is out there, as I've heard people suggest.
In terms of how much time a process might take? Is that what you're suggesting, if we went out and did a request for proposal?
Correct. And expenses, if you can. I realize that is kind of hard, but is there something you could compare it to in the past? Because the city does this quite frequently with either department heads or other positions in the city.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is way off the cuff, but typically what we would do is we would hire a recruiter who would do the solicitation and submit the RFP and send that out. So that's hiring a recruiter.
And a general cost for something like that person?
It would be hard to...
Putting you on the spot?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I haven't done that for a while. It would be in the couple of $1,000 probably. And then there would be some kind of notice sent out for people to submit proposals. So there's probably a 4-week window when you first submit the notice, requesting applications, if you will, to when you close it. That's about a 3-week window. It would take in advance of that, it would take probably another month in front of that to put the specs together before you send it out to proposal. I know I'm speaking backwards. So first you'd hire your recruiter, take about a month to put the specs together on what the position would be. And then there would be about a 3-week window probably for solicitation of applications. And after that, then you do the review period. Give that maybe 2-3 more weeks, probably 3 more weeks. And then you conduct some kind of interview process and go through kind of the first run of applicants that meet the specs, and then you narrow those down, and you have a series of interviews that you all would conduct, or a subcommittee of council, and then you would make an offer. So where am I about? So probably maybe 3 to 4 months in terms of timing, and then you make an offer, and it usually takes a period of time, 4 or 6 weeks before you'd actually have somebody sitting in the seat. And that is rough. That's a rough estimate, but that's a pretty average recruitment time frame.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then just for the sake of conversation, if somebody else, another firm, was selected by council, what is the time frame of the switchover? And correct me if I'm wrong, both parties are paid at that time the switchover is being made. Are they not?
Yeah, most likely. I mean, we're going to need legal coverage, so there would be some kind of overlapping. And it would just depend on what kind of feedback we got. So we've had this firm in place for 9 years, almost 10 years now. So to go out with an RFP at this point, frankly, would cause some question. Why? What are the issues? Why is Lakewood changing? What's the concern? So we would have to answer those kind of questions. I can tell you anecdotally that a lot of our neighboring cities have had their legal counsel for decades. And because each city is really different, and each city has its own kind of way of doing business, it takes a while to understand and develop those relationships and to build that trust. It takes you all have to have a level of trust with your city attorney because of the real myriad topics and conversations that you have, and their job is to counsel you to make sure that your actions aren't going to get you in trouble and get us in trouble as a city. So frankly, it's hard to say what that might be. I don't know what the market is now. We may have some information if you want to hear a little more about what other cities have. And there's all kinds of models of attorney structures with cities. Some cities in the metro area, rather than have this hybrid where we have a contract who works 3 or 4 days a week and then contracts out specialties, some cities have a whole staff, say of half a dozen or 7 attorneys on staff, so that they can interact with staff and interact with counsel, so they together can handle all the different specialties. We've opted not to go that way. Lakewood tends to be more cost efficient whenever possible, and we don't have attorneys on retainer. Whereas people would like to be on retainer because there's some kind of guarantee there, we don't do that. When we have an issue, let's say we need a water lawyer or a bond counsel or a employment lawyer or real estate. I mean, there's many. We just, Tim has lawyers that he works with frequently, and he calls on those folks, and they're paid by the hour, and then they're done. So we don't have anybody on retainer. So it's a cheaper, less expensive model, just because that's typically how we go in Lakewood.
I'll come back later.
So I'll make a comment to that, and then I'm going to go to the folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet. It's kind of like a Christmas tree up here. But to further what our city manager talked about, and we talked about this a little bit earlier tonight, there's also an institutional amount of knowledge that goes with being in a community, which is critically important. We talked tonight that, when your first 4 years of council, you're just starting to figure everything out. And I think a lot can be said to that in a community as well, and really trying to understand what that is. So I'm going to go to Shakti, Councilor Vincent, Councilor Gutwein, and then we'll start again with the folks who've had some opportunities.
So I have some comments, but first I wanted to ask Barb for some clarification. You were talking about something about psychological review, and I sort of missed. You're saying which technique is better in terms of the...
Yeah, happy to clarify. I said that basically if you have a contract that has a termination point at which then maybe 3 or 6 months before that is coming up for renewal, that you would get to negotiate, that's an easier, psychologically, that's a positive process. And the other one would be more, it's a termination, so it's coming from the negative standpoint, and I think that just sets people up in a way that may be uncomfortable and wouldn't bring out the best decision making.
Thank you. So I would like to stand back a little bit and appreciate Tim. So I've been on council 2.5 years, and I often have legal questions, and I have found him to be very helpful. And particularly maybe in the situations where I don't agree with everyone else, I've found him, and I'm thinking here of construction defects that got really complicated and difficult. He spent a lot of time talking with me through the nuances in a way that helped me understand the issue. I talked to people who claim to be experts all over the region, and I would not understand what's going on if I hadn't talked to Tim. So, I very much appreciate that. I appreciate having him here. And I have the sense that staff shares that feeling, that the rest of the city relies on the city attorney, and we appreciate having Tim here. And so part of that is just sort of echoing what's already been said about the value of history and relationships in order for us to be able to function efficiently. And I thought it was interesting that we asked Tim, what's the history of our city attorney, and he could explain that to us. That said, I think, we heard a little bit of description of the idea behind not putting an end to the contract was that then we feel like we can end it at any point. I think we're hearing some conversation here that that might not have the desired effect. And so I do think periodic reviews make sense. I think it's relevant that this is a contract relationship, not an employee relationship. I don't know that the reviews should be annual, but there should be reviews. I think it's probably to our financial best interest that it is a contract relationship. In terms of what does that review entail? So we don't do like an RFP for, I think it's important that we find some way to objectively evaluate salary and performance in a periodic review. I don't think that necessarily means an RFP. I mean, like we do with the judge's salary, we create a committee that looks into salaries. I think there are a variety of ways to do that, and we should look at what makes most sense for us. And we don't need to figure that out right now. That would be at the end of the contract. The timing, I am not happy with August 31st, 2017, although I understand the logic of that date. I have seen how issues get caught up in elections, and I think that we should set the contract so that it ends at a time that's not going to be in the heat of an election. Let me check my notes. I guess the one other thing I'd say that is relevant to elections to some extent is that we've had a big turnover on council. And just like I want to give Tim credit where credit's due, I feel like we have an exceptional staff. And that's what makes this city strong. And I want to create confidence in our exceptional staff that they should stay here and keep us exceptional. And so part of that is that I want to make it clear that we're not making any knee-jerk, fast decisions about changes in staff, that we value the people who are here, we want to do appropriate reviews, but this is all going to be measured and within the context of the fact that everything's going very well here. So I would like to see a contract with the changes. I'm happy to have an end date. I would want it to be after the end date that some people are proposing. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Councillor Vincent, thank you for your patience.
Oh, that's fine. And I apologize for being over here going, whoa, whoa.
You're fine.
But I think that just a small item, you said item number 11, and it's actually item number 9 that we have the ordinance on. So that was probably the most unexciting comment of this whole evening.
However, probably one of the most important.
So that's all I have.
Thank you. So let's put a pause on this situation and probably withdraw that and resubmit it as item number 9.
So yeah, I knew I shouldn't have gone to the restroom. That was what started all the chaos, I guess.
Is that correct protocol, sir? Withdrawal.
We need to say
If there's anybody who's confused about what agenda item we were talking about, maybe we could have a show of hands. I think that's what it comes down to is clerical errors or mistaken references aside. We've been talking about the same contract for quite a while now. So
I'm hesitant to show hands. We got in trouble for that one. So
it was.
Is everybody crystal clear that we're dealing with Tim's contract? Yeah. We'll make the motion over again just to be safe.
So do I withdraw the previous motion?
Correct.
Yes, and just restate it.
Do I just say I would like to withdraw the previous motion?
Sure.
Okay. So I would like to withdraw.
And that would be with the permission of the maker of the second.
With.
I would like to withdraw.
I would like to withdraw the previous motion.
Of course.
And I move for the adoption of Resolution 2016, -11. It's item number 9, but it's -11.
Oh, I'm having a very awkward moment.
That's okay.
That's all right.
I learned how to withdraw a proposal.
We still have to second that.
Yeah.
Just to be sure.
Second.
All right. See, folks, we're all learning together. All right. Councillor Gutwein?
Thank you. I guess I'd first just like to say that this is such a great example of why I'm thankful that we have someone with experience as we are all learning together. So I really appreciate that with Tim. And then I also just wanted to say that for me, having a long-term contract or a contract that we can terminate at any time, I personally take that very seriously. And to all of our meetings and all of our interactions, we are evaluating whether or not this is going well, and it is. And I would like to say, so just as an example, when I first came on, I had some questions about 2090, and I spent maybe 2 hours getting every question that I had, poring over documents. And I know that Barb also did the same thing, Councilwoman Franks, on Friday. And for both of us, coming from 2 different sides, we were both given respect and answers. And that is something that is important to me, that no matter what side I'm coming from, I can get my questions answered. And yeah, so I absolutely support Tim, and I think that today and every other day we do evaluate whether or not this is working. That said, if everyone else would feel more comfortable with a contract time, I do not have a strong opposed to that. But I do think that in the interest of best serving the people, I'm not sure that it's necessary if there's not a problem. And I'd asked a lot of questions about what other cities do and if this is a regular process that other cities go through. And essentially it sounds like they don't typically go out for bid unless there is a problem. And because of the nature of the relationship, that makes sense to me. So I think that is all. Thank you.
All right. So let's go with, oh goodness gracious. We'll go back up. Councilwoman Harrison, Councilor Wickman, Councilor Abel, Councilor Franks, Councilor Coop, Councilor Shakti.
I'm betting on midnight. What do you guys think? Okay. A couple of different things that I want to thank you for. Tim, you were recognized and got the opportunity to become the expert on the marijuana law. And I appreciate the fact that you did that. Thank you so much, because even though that wasn't my perfect business entity in the city of Lakewood, to say the least, you advised us well, you gave us good information, and I really appreciate that. There will never be, ever, in any professional setting, an attorney or a doctor or any other kind of professional that you work with that will give you the exact answer you want every single time. There's always going to be differences. But Tim, what you've done is you've given us your best opinions to keep this council and this city on the right side of the law. And I appreciate that very much. I would like to offer an amendment to the existing motion. I'd like to change this to have a 5-year contract at the still stated dollar amounts that were in this contract. Same increase, same everything else. I think his firm is due that for the amount of work that he puts in. I would also like to ask Tim to report annually to the council about what you have done and the projects that you've worked with, understanding that it may not be appropriate in a full council meeting, but there would be times when, as you do an executive session, you would report. But public needs to know how much you work for us. You do a great job. Don't keep it under a bushel basket, okay?
Point of information, we do get a yearly update. That's different than a yearly evaluation, though.
Okay? I want a report annually from Tim.
He does. He writes an annual report, but it's in writing. It's submitted in written form.
Talking about a report in
I'm
person.
talking about a report from the dais.
There's a motion on the floor
There is a motion on the floor.
to extend it to August.
No, a 5-year contract.
5 year, but what's the date on that?
That would be from March 1st, correct?
Right.
So for 5 years to
March 1, 21.
right.
So motion on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
We can have this motion and a second discussion on this motion.
Just the amendment.
So, Councilor Shakti and Councilor Abel.
I would, so,
Not a friendly.
can I amend?
I'm asking for a friendly amendment.
I would ask for a friendly amendment to make it a 4-year contract, to just get it totally in a even year as opposed to an odd year.
I'll accept that.
Does the second accept that?
Second.
All right, so there's a motion and a second for a 4-year contract. Who would like to speak to that? Just blink your light at me. Councilor Abel, Councilor Coop, Councilor Johnson.
My light working?
Yeah, now well, I said you can blink it, yes, and Councilor Wickman.
I'd like to express my confidence in our attorney. I'd like to also say that we have about half a dozen things on the table right now that would represent changes in this contract. We're doing this on the fly. It's never a good idea to do something on the fly with this many changes in it. Be happy to entertain all of these ideas if we had another few weeks to discuss it. I look at this, the revisions in the contract in depth, but I think that the way we're approaching this is not very wise, and I'd be against this particular amendment, although I am not against extending the contract.
Councilor Coop.
I just have a procedural question to start off with. Isn't, this is a contract where, this isn't like an ordinance or something like that. Is that at any point in time can Tim Cox say, well, no, that's I'm not going to agree to that. Is that, making motions on your contract, is that the way this is supposed to be going?
It's certainly, like other contracts that come before you, it is permissible to have suggested changes through the amendment process. Mr. Abel makes a point that, too many changes starts to look like a different animal. I would just point out to all, or remind all, that it is the contract terms are exactly the same as what's in place under my previous firm's contract, with the exception of the 4th day in the office, which is something that the administration has requested because of workload concerns. The $5 increase for the few hours that would get billed beyond those 4 days in any given week. And apparently in a colossal misjudgment, the change to the no termination date, which again was done in response to comments that I heard from council members who had a problem with waiting 5 years to review the contract again. It was done as a way to remind everybody that it can happen at any time. I'm more than happy to go back to that term. So we put a contract on the table that is a exact duplicate. All the terms have been discussed tonight except for the term of the contract, the length of the contract. All of those terms were in the current agreement, except as I just identified.
Okay, and you said you were okay with the 5-year. Are you okay with the 4-year?
In keeping with my mantra that the contract can be terminated at any time, any term would be acceptable. Obviously, the longer, the better. It provides more security. But you approve a 4 or 5 year contract, and I still know that it can be reviewed anytime you think you're unhappy with the performance. So that's a yes.
Okay, I am very comfortable with your knowledge, with how you have answered our questions, kept us from getting ourselves in trouble sometimes. I don't know if there are going to be a lot of suggested changes that we don't normally consider in a regular session like this. I would like there's something to be in place to where you're not having to spend a lot of time trying to please us. You have work to do. You have work to do for the citizens. I don't want you to have to keep looking over your shoulder. I'd like to have something in place. I think having a review in place, being part of the Budget and Audit Committee, there's a review, and when the auditor's contract is coming up, there is an FRP put out for that process. In the past, it takes up a lot of time on both sides. So I don't feel it is in our best interest, since there is nothing broken, in my opinion. I know there's varying difference in opinions about that up here. I personally don't feel anything is broken. I don't think anything has to be fixed. So with the changes so far to this contract, I'm comfortable with that, and I would be happy to vote for you remaining council for the next 4 years with a possible review process, maybe a committee put together, and in the second half of the 3rd year or in the beginning of the 4th year of that. But I'm sure that that's something that staff, that City Manager Hodson can instruct us on the best way to set that up along with the mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, to the motion on the floor. Okay.
Actually, thank you, Mayor. I'd actually like to make a substitute motion that we push this out for 2 weeks to a date certain and have a work session. This just came about when we saw your contract, 5 days ago. Frankly, I think there's some ideas here, a lot of them that have merit. And to Councillor Abel's point, this is actually a huge deal, folks. This is our city attorney's contract. This is not something that we should just do on the fly. Let's all sit down and have some time and look at some of these alternate ways of doing things. I think there's merit in that, Councilman Abel. I'd like to make a motion.
I would second that idea.
Whoa. Point of order. There's a motion on the floor. Councillor Harrison, do you accept that friendly amendment?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Councillor Wickman, to the motion.
What I'm detecting here, the problem I see, is it's human nature to kind of stick with the status quo, which, if it's not fixed, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Now, as a professional economist, I know that's not the way to evaluate things. I've taken executive management courses at Harvard and stuff like that, so I know it's not the way to go. But I'm realizing it's human nature. So I think I need to use an example to try to explain why we can't simply focus on whether we like Tim or not. I'll give you an example. All right, let's say that there's a project or something out there, and it makes $1 million. Now, if we were to sit there and look at that project and say, hey, we made $1 million, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Now, everybody in the room here could sit there and vote, that's a good or bad thing. But what if the alternatives to you are, if you went with another project, you made $10 million. If you went to a third project, you made $100 million. All of a sudden, with that perspective, making $1 million is a bad choice, even though $1 million is good. Reverse. What if we have a situation where you lose $1 million? Is that a bad thing? Would you sit there and say, that's a bad project, that's a bad employee, that's a bad thing? What if the other alternatives were you lost $10 million, or the third alternative was you lost $100 million? The point is, you can't look at a project in isolation. You have to compare it to other alternatives. The correct decision is to find the best alternative. And that's my point is, we have to look at alternatives. If we don't look at any alternatives, we are not fulfilling our responsibility. So with that in mind, I go back to, I think we shouldn't extend this contract beyond what it's already required. But, that's required. But we need to be looking at our alternatives. And then either we have the confidence, knowing what we're talking about, that we're doing good with what we've got, or if we find that we can do better, we need to go that way. If we fail to consider the alternatives, we are not fulfilling our responsibilities.
Councilor Franks to the motion. Okay. Let's see here. Councilor Abel to the motion.
Yes, thank you. If we're going to move on this tonight, and we want to, from what I hear, the consensus is we want to add a review process to this, then perhaps the maker of the amendment, the motion for an amendment, would like to add something that solidifies that call for a review. Otherwise, it will be 4 or 5 years before we can work that into a contract. That's another thing about addressing this on the fly. What are we doing? So I would ask the maker of the motion if she would accept a friendly suggestion to add the review process to this motion.
I'd accept the review in year 3 of the contract.
Right now, we have a motion we have a contract that's up in next year when we could add it then. So, again, I think it should come from the first year.
So the acceptance was for the year 3, and that was not accepted. Councilor Shakti and Councilor Gutwein, you both were lit up, but didn't. So are you good? Yeah, I had a Okay. So to the motion that's on the floor, and I will support this motion, absolutely. If we wouldn't be having this conversation, there was nothing that instituted this by Tim not being the person to be our city manager. This was actually instituted in a name change for his organization. So to the point that, we should go out and look at this, we weren't even having that conversation. We just had a planning retreat in February, and city attorney issues never came up at a whole planning retreat. So, what brought this forward was a name change, and I feel quite confident in going forward. So I'm going to call for the vote on the amendment. Do you have another comment?
I have a question of the maker. Again, you are still willing to accept it on the 3rd year?
Yes.
Thank you.
Is there a second on that, on the 3rd year? No. So there's not.
I'll second that.
It needs to come from the original second, which would be Councilor Coop, correct? On a friendly amendment?
Yes, it's as if the motion is unsupported if the seconder did not accept the change.
I want to call for the question, but can you please read what we've been discussing?
Oh, and absolutely. And so just to make this clear, this is an amendment too. So this isn't the official contract. This is amending it's the city attorney's contract to expire in 4 years from March 31st of 2016.
March
1st of 2016 will expire March 20th.
March
1st.
March 1st, 2020.
2020, 4 years. Councilor Wickman.
Yeah, I just want to also point out, if we don't accept this amendment, we can make some other amendments. So we don't have to just take this one.
So I'm lighting up here. Do you want to speak before we vote?
Yes.
Councilor Coop.
Since I was mistaken on what the motion was, since she did not accept, it was my understanding you did not accept the 4 years.
I'm sorry, I did accept the 4 years. I did accept the review in 3 years, but no one seconded it. So
Okay.
right now, what we're talking about is just the contract at 4 years.
Is that motion still on the floor with the review at 3 years?
He's the seconder, although there was a question called, but it was not voted up or down on the calling of the question. So does that allow for us to?
What I'm hearing is that Councilor Coop maybe misunderstood what the change to the motion to amend was.
Yes, I thought we were back to 5 years, and it didn't make sense to have it at the review at 3 years, was the way I understood that. So I'll just put it out there. If it's still relevant, I would second that motion.
And perhaps it's cleaner if we consider that motion dead, if you wanted to make the same motion and see if Councilor Harrison or somebody else seconds it.
Okay, I would like to amend this contract to a 4-year term starting March 1st of 2016 with a review scheduled in the 3rd year of that contract.
I second.
Thank you.
Motion and a second. Councilor Abel. You're lit up.
I believe you called the question.
All right. So let's go ahead and please cast your votes for the amendment.
No.
Councilor Franks. Oh, yeah. So we're not voting on, we're just voting on whether, just the amendment to extend the contract 4 years with a review in 3. Yep. Okay, we're going to have to start over. Councilor Abel would like to change his vote. So I'll clear us out, start voting. All right, so that carries 8-3, the noes being Councilor Wickman, Roy Ball, and Johnson. So now we have the original resolution on the table with the amended of the 4-year, 3-year review. Councilor Wickman.
I would like to make an amendment that the contract be, well, I want to change the term again. I want to have another vote. I would like to extend the current contract that we have and just change the name of the parties. We have a contract with this firm. We can continue that contract by just changing the names, and that's all we need to do. And that way we keep the status quo, but it gives us time to, again, look at a long-term solution. So, yeah, I guess so. My motion is to keep the current contract.
Point of order. We have an amendment that changed that. Can we now entertain a motion that would kill the previous amendment?
If I could, there's a more fundamental issue.
Right.
There's a more fundamental issue, and that is that the current contract cannot be extended. The firms have different identities. It's not merely a name change. It's a different law firm.
All right. Can we just change the names?
It's not just a name change, Counselor. It's a different law firm. That contract, that law firm now has a different name, and the contract is no longer going to be valid.
All right.
That's why we need to approve a new contract.
All right. I'll put an amendment in that within the next 12 months, we do an assessment and study of our legal services and report a recommendation to council for a long-term legal service.
I'll second that.
Okay, although that, I don't know how that language would play into the contract. So help me understand how.
Well, it wouldn't necessarily be in the contract per se. I'm just making, well, I guess maybe it's not an amendment, maybe just another motion. That right now we want to review our legal situation and recommend a more long-term solution.
Well, there's a motion on the floor, so we need to just, if you wouldn't mind re-clarifying for a council member who was gone, please.
Okay, that we will have a committee look into our legal situation and offer a recommendation within the next 6 months for a long-term legal service.
So there's been a motion and a second to that point. I will not be supporting that because we are that body right here, and that's what we're doing currently at this time. Councilor Coop?
That was the question I was going to ask, is to define to have somebody do this, and then.
Well, I would say it's the council. I guess my point is we shouldn't be doing it here in the next hour. This is something we ought to revisit this issue, kind of what Ramey was saying. We need to revisit this issue in a timely manner. Right now, we're shooting from the hip, and we're talking about a very important consideration, and we're making a decision at 10 o'clock at night.
Okay, so any more comments on Councilor Wickman's motion? All right, please start voting. Okay, and that fails 7-4, the noes being Paul, Vincent, Harrison, Shakti, Abel, Coop, Gutwein. Councilor Franks, you had lit up.
Well, is this the appropriate time for just general comments? Okay. So one thing I wanted to talk about is, like I said, we're kind of picking at this a little bit at the seams. I don't want us to lose sight of the fact of the independent review of the contract. I still think that's a critical thing. So I wanted to point that out. I certainly also wanted to point out that I think it's important for us to have an independent performance review, just because that's part of a natural process, either with contractors or employers. But I did also want to kind of add some additional texture. We were talking earlier about, the 2090 and Tim and I getting together, and then Tim and Dana getting together. And I personally have well over 1,000 hours studying the documentation. So this doesn't come without Tim and I having a background together, and didn't always agree. In fact, in many cases, vehemently disagreed. But I did want to say that since I've been on council, at every turn that I have needed support, he's been there, he's explained things, taken the time, I'm sure out of a very busy day. So I do want to acknowledge that none of my questions and concerns up here reflect in any way on the actual work that's being done. There is some history there, and I think things could have been done differently, but that doesn't mean that there is any angst going forward. I just think that we need to look at independent review of any contract, and we certainly need to look at, employee or contract reviews as being taken seriously. But I certainly do understand tribal knowledge, relationships, and believe in all that. So I just wanted to kind of add a little more texture to the discussion.
Councilor Harrison?
If we approve the motion as it's been made, there's nothing in there that talks about that we couldn't come in and do an independent review. We can still do a review. The contract would still allow a termination as with knowledge on both sides, so we could still do that independent review. But I think that tribal knowledge and extension of the contract is due. It's a necessary part of keeping the information in the city ongoing, the projects that Tim's been working on. We can still go out and review and make sure that we're getting the best deal, but I also want to make sure he can still do his job. That's really important.
Councilor Johnson and Councilor Abel.
Thank you, Mayor. And Tim, I am your friend. I actually do support you. But when I'm sitting up here, my role is different. And I really do feel that we need to have a sunset on this. Personally, as I said, I think it should be December the 16th, or excuse me, December the 31st, and give us an option of looking at other things. Plus, I truly, Councilman Abel, I think we're making some serious decisions here tonight, when actually we should probably be sitting down for a work session. And I also believe vehemently that we should have a yearly evaluation. Everybody in the world always has that with their employer. It's important to do that. So I'm not real comfortable with the way we're going about this. I'd like to see us give it some more thought and sleep on it and come back another time. A date certain, within 2 weeks. But we're doing this too quickly for me.
Councilor Abel.
I place a premium on institutional knowledge, and it would be a large learning curve for someone else coming in present. And I have a concern that so far what we've done is add a review in the 3rd year of the 4-year extension. It doesn't say anything about the 4th year of the extension, or about the 1st year of the next contract, or the one after that. We have one review mentioned in this, and I think, again, that's a symptom of handling this in too hasty a manner. So I'm conflicted. I do like the review period. I have no objection to the 4 years, but we need to make that an annual review, not just a review in the 3rd year of the approaching contract.
Mr. Cox, did you look like you were wanting to address this?
Well, there have been a lot of comments about a review process or an annual review process, and I just did want to be heard on that, if that's okay. Personally and professionally, I have no problem with subjecting myself or my firm to regular scrutiny by the council, however it's characterized, whether it's called a review or contract status update or whatever it is. We're not hiding from that. We started doing the annual report at the request of council several years ago in lieu of a review, and it was not my idea. It was something that we implemented upon request. One factor that has not been discussed and that I think should be considered is some of you may know that the Internal Revenue Service, and I see Councilor Harrison nodding her head, has an active program examining independent contractor situations in various contexts, and particularly in local government. And there have been a number of cases where they've scrutinized contract relationships, decided by applying their factors that we think this looks more like an employment relationship, and they have essentially penalized the employer, to use that term loosely, by saying, well, it's been 3 years or 5 years or 7 years, you owe that person the value of benefits and such for the time that you treated them like a contractor when they really were an employer. And that's based on the kinds of connections between the contractor and the contracting entity. The more you look like an employee, the more the IRS is likely to treat you like an employee. I'm sorry, I was just running out of steam there. I had to replenish.
Thought you were imitating a famous moment from a previous politician.
Oh, I'm not that clever at this
hour.
hour.
Bottle of water.
So that is a factor, that an annual review is one of those things that they'll look at to say employees get reviewed annually, contractors not necessarily. Directing the details of employment, directing the specific hours that you work, how you do your work, and so on. Those are things that the IRS considers, as well as things like that you have an office supplied by the contracting entity. That's a necessity, in my view, for the kind of work that we do. But those are things that we take into account. We're certainly not looking to create additional reasons for the IRS to examine this relationship, because it's not in anybody's best interests for them to decide that it is what we say it isn't in terms of employment versus contract. But that aside, whatever the council decides to do tonight or at any point in the future about reviewing the performance of the city attorney's office and the city attorney in particular is acceptable. It's a reality, and if you decided tonight not to impose an annual review, you could decide 2 weeks from now to do so, or a month from now, or 6 months from now, or whatever. And you can do that upon the occurrence of any incident that dissatisfies you, and you decide at that point, we're going to take a look at our contract and decide on that.
Mr. Mayor, I had not yielded the floor. I didn't want to interrupt the city attorney. May I finish? Sure. How do we... My concern was over the review being specified for only one time. How do we now go back and institutionalize that review? Well, if the entire council wishes to do so.
What I think you've done so far, knowing that the resolution itself hasn't been acted upon, but with the amendment in place, you've committed to do a review in the third year of a 4-year contract. That does not preclude you from doing anything in addition to that, and you can decide that at any time. This is not the one time to decide how this relationship is to be structured.
My other concern is that we have the power to divorce you when we're good and ready, and I don't think we want you to have the power to divorce us unless we are good and ready. So that termination clause, again, I go back to that.
With the exception of the end date that we've now established, at least for now, the language is what was in the current contract. We've never considered exercising any right to terminate, and happy to consider any amendment to remove the contractor's ability to terminate at any time.
May I offer an amendment to do so?
Sure.
I offer that amendment.
So,
an amendment that would eliminate the contractor's ability to terminate in 90 days. The contractor, if he wanted to end the contract, would have to wait until the end of the 4-year period. But we could do so tomorrow. Well, with 90 days notice.
As I think about it, Councilor, as you've articulated, I think circumstances can always arise that could lead to a break in the relationship. And the point of that termination provision is to give adequate time for other arrangements to be made. For example, and I just use this because it's a vivid example, if I found in a situation, if I believed in a situation that the city council had acted against my advice and had done something illegal or unethical, I need to have the ability to terminate the relationship if that's appropriate under the circumstances. So I think there needs to be some provision for me to get out of that situation if something like that were to happen. So it doesn't have to be for any reason, but it could be for certain reasons, or it could be a longer termination period if that were appropriate. We certainly wouldn't want to do anything to leave the city unrepresented, and it would be our obligation, we think, to ensure that you had representation even after something like that occurred. But we need to have the ability to say, okay, we're going to end this because of what happened at some point in time.
So you're saying that if you give us advice and we reject that advice, that you would want to leave our employee?
Not simply rejecting the advice, but if the result of that was what I believe to be an illegal act or an unethical act, I may, under the rules of professional conduct, have an obligation to terminate the relationship. I have not looked at that for that purpose, but there may be that requirement.
One other thing is, one of my fellow council people just told me it would be tantamount to slavery if we held you in our service until the contract expired. Is that a correct assessment?
How about a well-compensated indentured servitude?
I like that better. Thank you.
So
I have a motion out there.
I'll second it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the motion is that Tim cannot terminate his contract prior to March 31st of 2020.
Without cause. Would that satisfy your ethical requirements?
I believe that gives us that flexibility, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion and a second regarding that, and that's acceptable to Mr. Cox. Is that correct?
Just procedurally speaking, with the addition of the without cause, I think the seconder needs to indicate whether that's acceptable or not.
That's acceptable.
Thank you.
So does anybody want to speak to that motion?
I do.
Okay. Counselor Shakti.
So I am profoundly disturbed by that idea. I'm a city councilor. I am committed to doing this work. At some point, if I decide not to, I'm allowed to leave. Contracts are about money, so there could be some damages. Like if you left, then you would have to pay us money or something like that, but you do not have to work for the city. And I don't want to make it at all look like we're doing that, partly because I want the people who work here to want to work here, and also I want to live in a world where we all work where we want to. So.
All right. Anybody else like to speak to that motion? Counselor Coop?
As much as I appreciate Counselor Abel's good intentions, I would have to echo Counselor Shakti's sentiment there that, you know, I would hate it if you didn't want to work here, but if you didn't want to work here, then okay.
All for the question.
Is there anybody else? All right. Okay. Well, if nobody else wants to speak, we can just go ahead and vote without having to have another vote on calling the question. Is that acceptable with the motion? All right. Please, you're voting on Charlie's amendment. Okay. And it fails 8-3, the noes being Vincent, Roybal, Harrison, Johnson, Shakti, Coop, Franks, Gutwein. All right. Now we're back to Counselor Johnson. Would you like to speak? Or no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Counselor Roybal was first. I'm sorry. Were you like?
Mayor, you know, it's getting kind of late, and I would like to make a suggestion or recommendation that we continue this at a date certain in the immediate future, so we're all cognizant. Right now, I'm getting very tired, and I'm not being able to function correctly.
If that's a motion, I'll second it.
All right. There's a motion and a second to continue this to what date?
2 weeks.
That would be March 28th.
All right, and I'll just speak to that. I will not be supporting that. I believe we have come a long way tonight, and we can wrap it up. Councilor Harrison.
What I would question is, Tim does not have a contract today.
Right, we're operating as if under the terms of the contract. We had the option of bringing the contract forward in the second February meeting. This situation with my firm developed rather rapidly. It had been a long time in coming, but then necessitated by some construction in the office that required everybody to move out on March 1st. That's what prompted us to get the new contract ready for March 1st. So we had it in a place where we could have brought it forward at the second February meeting, but we wanted to meet with each of you individually, and that time didn't allow for us to do both of those things. So in the meantime, we've agreed to operate under the terms of the contract as if it were in place for the month of March, or for the time that's lapsed. But obviously, the longer we go without a contract.
So if we decided to delay this, you would still continue the contract, the existing contract, the non-existing contract, until March 31st.
I misspoke when I said the end of the month. We agreed to operate under the terms of the contract as if it were in place up until the time when the council has an opportunity to act on it.
So if we don't approve it tonight, would you be billing us per hour on a contract basis? How would you do that?
We will honor the terms of the contract as if it were in place until there's a decision made. I selfishly, personally, because the contract has not changed except in a couple of respects, I would much prefer to see a vote on the contract as proposed with the amendments made.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Gutwein, and then Councillor Johnson.
Thank you. So a few weeks, or last week, I got to go to the NLC, which is the National League of Cities, and in it we talked about how cities get things done. And I'm so thankful to be a part of that level of local government, and that I feel very confident that with all of the different voices here, we've looked at this and talked about different options, and we have even a reporter on our team here who very carefully looks at everything. So I'm very confident in the fact that we have examined this, and also that Tim asked for a meeting with us, I believe a month ago. It was February 18th. So we have had a month to look at his previous contract. There was a name change here. I think that we can be confident in making this decision tonight.
So, Councillor Johnson to the motion.
I guess. I'm getting kind of confused in the weeds.
But the motion that's on the floor right now is to
support Dave.
To extend.
Okay. I do support Councillor Wickman's motion to put this out.
Councillor Royball's motion.
Councillor Royball. Woo-hoo. Woo-hoo. To put this out, I think that there are loose ends. It's late. And folks, to me, some of the loose ends are an annual evaluation. I can't even get grocery cards on a study session without going through quite a bit. So we've got too much to solve.
Councillor Royball.
I just called for the question.
Okay. All right. So the question is delay for 2 weeks. Please cast your votes. All right, and that motion fails. 7 nays. Paul, Vincent, Harrison, Shakti, Abel, Coop, Gutwein. All right. So,
Mr. Mayor, would you be opposed to Councillor Royball standing up for a few moments? His knee is hurting him,
no, absolutely.
And I think he needs to stand.
Well, and I don't see any more lights. I think if I may, there's plenty of things that we could say are platitudes to Tim or not, but I'd like to just consider making a vote on the whole thing. So with that, no other questions. There's a motion and a second. Please cast your votes. And that motion carries 7-4, the noes being Wickman, Royball, Johnson, and Franks. Thank you. Executive report.
Thank you.
I actually do have one, and I'll make this brief. You know, in the city of Lakewood, people really love their pets. People love their dogs. Have we noticed that? People love their dogs in the city here. And we urge pet owners and encourage pet owners to be responsible as a pet owner. And that includes adhering to our leash laws and cleaning up after your pets. we urge citizens who have their dogs and care dearly about their dogs to take care of their dogs and be responsible. Having said that, we have experienced a real increase lately in complaints about people not adhering to the leash laws and, unfortunately, people not cleaning up after their dogs and picking up the dog waste. And all of us suffer when we're using and enjoying our public parks when there's a lot of dog excrement around. So I want to make it really clear, it's really, as a dog owner, it's really your responsibility to be a good pet owner and to be responsible for your dog's actions. Now, we are initiating a program to help that for the folks that aren't able or refuse to pick up after their dogs, and I'm here to announce this. We're going to start working with our community service youth who have been in trouble with the courts, and as serving their time, if you will, they go out and they clean graffiti off of public buildings, which is a great thing. In addition to that, they will also be helping us in our public spaces by cleaning up dog poo. Dog waste. I wasn't going to say that. Dog waste, excrement. So we're going to try that. We're going to try that. We still need pet owners to be responsible. I think you heard that. But we're going to use our community service youth to help us and to help pick up. So we're going to start with our most heavily violated parks and see if we can't make some good action that way. So, and hopefully a clean park will encourage clean parks, right? So if yours is the only dog that's going to make a waste there, maybe you'll be more encouraged to clean it up. So let's all keep our fingers crossed and hope people take care of their own dogs' stuff. And for the ones who don't, we're going to have some folks helping us out. And I want to announce that today. And I have no other report because it is late.
Thank you very much for that. And I'll just make it really quick. I just want to thank my colleagues up here. This was a lot of discussion, and I appreciate everybody's patience and understanding. And we got it done, and we got it done in a civil, meaningful manner. And I'm also thrilled that we are retaining the services of our Attorney of the Year for the Metro City Attorneys Association in 2015. So congratulations. Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Thank you. Just want to say that the Ward 1 meeting our regular Ward 1 meeting is this Saturday, 9 to 11 in the old council chambers, which is actually in the police building. We are going to have a speaker come and talk about terrorism, homeland security. It's designed to be informational, educational. It's not just for Ward 1. Please come and join us. I think you'll appreciate his video that he's going to show. Thank you.
Council President Shakti.
No report.
Councilor Gutwein.
I just want to echo what Adam just said. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to be the first one here. And I just also want to specifically thank Councilwoman Franks because she always has such a very respectful way of asking questions and carefully examining everything. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Councilmember Franks. Councilor Coop. Councilor Abel.
No report and no delay of adjournment.
Okay. Councilor Harrison.
I'll say this really fast. Ward 5 meeting on community safety this Saturday, 9 a.m. at the Bear Valley Church. Be there or don't miss the cookies.
Councilor Roybal, who will soon be running the Colfax Marathon, I think, with that new knee.
Pretty soon. No report.
Councilor Vincent.
No report.
Councilor Wickman. All right, with nothing else said, we will adjourn the meeting at 10:42 p.m. Thank you.